Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special guest, Timothy Alberino, to talk with us about about the connections between CERN and the occult, as well as questions of ancient technology. Timothy Alberino is the director and host of the documentary series True Legends, as well as the Alberino Analysis on YouTube. He has appeared on various TV and radio shows such as Skywatch TV, Weekend Vigilante, and now the Sharpening Report. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Timothy Alberino to the show. Tim, how are you doing?
Hey, Josh, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for making time to do this. I suppose I should give a shout out and a thank you to Sheila Zielinski for hooking this up.
Yeah. She mentioned to me that you were interested in doing a show, so she gave you my contact information. So she is the one who made this happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's in the Sharpening group, the Sharpening Report Facebook group, I was getting a lot of people suggesting I have you on the show, and I had been familiar with your work for a while, and I thought that's a really good idea. So I tried to find your email address online, and I couldn't. So luckily, right around that time, I had just met Sheila. I was on her show, so I was like, hey, you might know him. Can you help me out? And she did. So big thanks to Sheila, and big thanks to all the people out there that suggested Tim as a guest. So for those who might not be familiar with you or your work, can you give us a rundown of your testimony, how you came to know Jesus, and how that led to what you do today?
Let's see if I can give you a short rundown. Well, I guess it might be relevant to know that I am the son of a pastor, and always have been. I have a twin brother, by the way. His name is Anthony. We grew up in a very godly home. My father was a non-denominational pastor, and so we grew up in a church environment. And there's a lot I could say about my formative years, you might call them, but to make a long story short, what got me to where I am now, especially in terms of my interests, my investigative research interests, and what I'm doing now with Steve Quayle, was a decision I made when I was 19 years old to leave the United States and basically just set out and wander around South America. And then my intention was to eventually end up in Africa and make my way north. Never got out of South America. I ended up staying in Peru. I went into the Amazon jungle, in the Amazon basin near the city of Iquitos is where I spent a lot of time. A lot of people are probably familiar with the city of Iquitos. It's kind of a tourist attraction in Peru. And so I ended up living in the Amazon, actually living in the jungle for a while, and had a very unbelievable, life-changing experience while I was in the jungle, and basically ended up getting married, staying in Peru for a while, and running a ministry down there. Then I came back to the United States and ended up hooking up with Steve Quayle. And one thing led to another, and we are now doing a whole bunch of stuff, including producing a documentary film series called True Legends, and we're engaged in other kinds of research and other projects as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, from what I've seen from you two, you both are doing amazing work out there, and it's definitely needed in the church. You know, most of the church, they're not willing to even think about this stuff, let alone spend their lives researching it and giving answers to people who need them. So I for one really appreciate the type of work that you guys are doing. Now, I recently, I'm big into CERN and quantum physics, and that's like my whole thing. I mean, I do other things, but I'm really interested in that. And I came across your recent video on CERN, which is just blown up. I mean, that's got a lot of views, and it's well deserved because it's really well done. And that was on the Alberino analysis. What was it that made you become interested enough in CERN to want to do a video on it?
Well, I hadn't done an analysis for probably 6 months because of the expeditions that we've been doing, and also the editing for the films. I'm involved in obviously going on the expeditions, writing script, editing, and anybody who does that kind of work knows how time consuming it is. So I didn't have a chance to do another analysis, and I really wanted to. So after we published Technology of the Fallen, which is episode 1 in our True Legends documentary film series, I had a window of time to think about doing another analysis. People were asking me to do another analysis, so I decided I want to get one done before I head out on the next expedition, which we're gearing up to do for next month. So I kind of spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to talk about, what I wanted to research, because every time I do an analysis, even if I'm familiar with the subject matter, as a rule, I go and research for a couple of weeks minimum. If I have to read a book, such as when I did the Pember, the Earth's Earliest Stages analyses, I obviously read Earth's Earliest Stages, read it over once, and then kind of went and kind of did an outline of it. But this time there's a whole lot of subjects that I would like to tackle, that I want to tackle in the future. So I had a list of things, and the one thing I couldn't get away from was CERN. Now, I had been only superficially aware of some of the circumstances and details concerning CERN before I approached this subject matter for this analysis. But I had a feeling that this was something that I needed to do. I needed to get it done, to get it out of the way now. It was important to do it now. There seemed to be a time-sensitive matter for a number of different reasons. I listened to a lot of interviews with Anthony Patch, who I believe is one of the most knowledgeable guys out there regarding CERN.
Absolutely.
And was really impressed with Anthony's work, and obviously listened to Steve, talked to Steve about it, and Tom Horn, who both of them have been tracking with CERN for a long time. And basically between those three guys, listening to those three guys, I was convinced I need to tackle this topic. This is really important, and it is time sensitive because of what CERN is actually doing now this month. And so that's a long-winded response to your question.
Hey, that's fine. That's what the show's all about. I ask them generally, for a reason, but so that's good. Take all the time that you want. Now there are a lot of theories, and a lot of books have been written, a lot of videos have been made and stuff, and I don't know that there are most if not all of the audience of this show are probably at least familiar with what CERN is and what the LHC is. Something that might not be as common though is the occult connections. What are some of the occult connections that people may have actually heard of on the internet, and to those more common ones, what's your analysis of those?
Well, it's important to point out, to establish that a lot of the occult connections are speculative
Right.
on our part as researchers. I don't think I've come across anything that I could consider a smoking gun in terms of an occult connection, but there's so much speculative stuff, so many speculative threads, that when you put the whole when you weave the whole thing together, it's it's pretty difficult to deny that there is, in fact, an occult conspiracy in the works regarding CERN. Most people are familiar with, obviously, the statue of Shiva that's outside of in the courtyard near the main facility. But I think that it's important to establish also, to be honest, that statue was gifted to CERN by the government of India, and they graciously received it. So I want to say right off the bat, before we start getting too deep into CERN, that we have to have a fundamental understanding of the way the world works before we can rightly understand the different elements, the mechanisms and machinations, as I put it in my analysis, concerning the occult connections. In other words, we have to be rational about how we view things like CERN. And when you view CERN and anything like CERN from a rational point of view, you can draw the conclusions concerning occult conspiracies and connections. You can draw logical conclusions that are very difficult to refute based on a rational viewpoint. And that rational viewpoint involves a couple of different things in my mind. Number one, there's something that I've been fascinated with for a long time, and that's called the inevitability thesis, which posits that once a technology is introduced into society, what follows is the inevitable development of that technology. And that happens to be a fact. It's proven itself, that thesis, the inevitability thesis, which is also known as the technological imperative, is a fact that if a technology is introduced into society, and that's the secret ingredient there, the key ingredient. Once the technology is introduced into society, once society becomes aware of a certain kind of technology, it is absolutely inevitable that technology will be developed. It will be developed, and it will be it will be taken as far as it can possibly go, as long as there is a financial incentive or a military incentive or an occultic incentive. And CERN actually has all three of those things incorporated into what they're doing. So that's one thing. We need to understand that according to the technological imperative, the work at CERN is inevitably going to take us to certain places, scientifically speaking and metaphysically speaking. There's no doubt about it. They've begun something that has an inevitable conclusion. Whether they like it or not, whether they want to admit it or not, it is a fact. Then the other thing is that we have to understand from a rational point of view is that much of what happens in civilization, in human civilization, much of the technology that is developed is the result of, shall we say, has nefarious roots. Let's just put it that way. On its face, it may seem like this is just something innocuous. This is, for example, the work that's being done at CERN is something that is that has the goodwill of mankind at its heart. That the purpose is to advance human knowledge, to understand the cosmos, to understand the Big Bang, the universe, just seconds after less than seconds, fractions of seconds after the Big Bang, and so forth. And yes, the vast majority of the scientific community involved in CERN believes that, and I would say that they're under that delusion that that's what CERN is about. But it doesn't matter what they think. I want everybody watching this to understand it makes no difference whatsoever what the scientists working at CERN think or want to think or what intentions they have. Makes no difference. They are nothing more than tools in the hands of their benefactors. And when I say benefactors, I'm talking about the people who are funding CERN and the people who are directing CERN from behind the scenes, not necessarily the actual human directors that we see. I forget. I don't remember who the name of the actual director of CERN right now. I'm not pointing my finger at the scientists at CERN or the current director of CERN. They may or may not be aware of anything other than their stated objective, which is on their website and which is all over the internet and all over different publications, which is what I already mentioned, to try and understand what the universe is made of, why we're all here, so forth and so on. However, the same could be said for the scientists that were working on the V1 and V2 rockets for the Nazis, such as Wernher von Braun and his group of scientists. Von Braun actually was imprisoned by Hitler for a while and was at odds with Hitler to a degree. A lot of the Nazi scientists were scientists who had to be Nazis in order to continue to work. And probably in order not to be executed or put into a concentration camp. Einstein was lucky enough to escape the Nazis before he could be roped in and forced to develop the technologies that the other scientists were working on. So he escaped and he came to the United States. But a lot of really, really good scientists did not escape. Some of those scientists were hardcore Nazis. Some of those scientists, like Joseph Mengele, were mad scientists, were evil, were very wicked people who were demented and were deeply disturbed individuals who apparently enjoyed the sufferings of others and to inflict sufferings on others. Sadistic individuals, right? So that exists and always will exist, but to a very minor degree. But the vast majority of scientists who were caught in the Nazi net were concerned only with advancing their particular field of science. They were, for example, the guys that were working on the V1 and V2 rockets and the propulsion technologies that the Nazis invented for the jet engines and so forth. Those guys, many of them were members of the Nazi Party because they had to be. But again, they were focused in, they were zeroed in on their particular and very narrow, by the way, field of study. And that's what they were dedicated to, first and foremost. Now, I'm not giving them a pass by any means, although a lot of those guys ended up working for us and were placed in the CIA, the NASA, the NSA, and other organizations, along with black projects and black budget projects. But my point is this. I said all of that to say this. Again, it makes no difference what the scientists at CERN believe, want to believe, or even think about what they're doing. It makes no difference. Just like it made no difference what the scientists working on the V1 and V2 rockets in Germany, and I think it's Peenemünde is the way you pronounce it. I can't remember the island there that they were developing those rockets on. It made no difference whether or not Wernher von Braun just dreamed of being able to go to the stars or land on the moon. It made no difference because Hitler wanted a rocket that he could drop on England. That's all that mattered. Hitler wanted a weapon, a Wunderweapon, or whatever they called it in German, a wonder weapon. That's all Hitler wanted, was a destructive device to rain terror on the English. And in fact, they wanted to be able to have a bomb that they could deliver into Manhattan to drop on New York or Washington, D.C. And hey, that's where we got a lot of our rocket propulsion from. That's where we got the idea of missiles that could go up in orbit and orbit around the Earth. The Nazis were developing that. They wanted to be able to drop a nuke on Manhattan, regardless of whatever dreamy-eyed visions that the scientists that were working on those projects had. Again, another very long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's all great stuff. It's important. What I really appreciate about the way that you go about your research, and because this is how I try to conduct myself too, is you don't go off the deep end or make really extraordinary claims without anything to back it up. Like you said, you got to have common sense and look at it rationally. And I wholeheartedly agree about the scientists at CERN that chances are they're not going to work thinking like we're going to do all this occult stuff today. You know,
Right.
I mean, like, you know, I mean,
Right.
yeah, and but like you said, it's behind the scenes. It's whoever is driving all that and who's making the decisions. And that kind of leads to my next question about some of the lesser known, more secretive occult type of connections or things that people might not be as aware of. Who do you think's really like running the show here and making these decisions, and what are they? What's the true intention of CERN and the LHC?
Well, that's a complicated question. Let me say that CERN, to truly understand what CERN is on its face, not going any deeper than a superficial level, and I don't mean to be insulting by what I'm about to say, but if you really take a good look at CERN and you watch their videos and you watch the documentaries on CERN and you listen to a lot of the scientists speaking from CERN, which I have, you realize very quickly that CERN is the largest aggregate of nerds on the planet.
Absolutely.
And it really is. I mean, these people are, many of them are bizarre individuals, really, really weird people. They are not, many of these people are not normal human beings. And again, I don't mean that to slight them. They're just obsessed with particle physics, absolutely out of their minds, obsessed with particle physics. So they're not even in a position, to be honest with you, Josh, they're not even in a position themselves, even though they work in CERN, they're not even in a position to evaluate whether or not CERN has occult connections, because they're biased. They're obsessed with particle physics. They're absolutely, it's a very closed community. And these are some of the most bizarre people you've ever seen in your life, because especially the theoretical physicists.
Oh yeah.
I mean, some of these theoretical physicists, man, I tell you what, I've read their work and I've listened to them speak, and they're borderline insane. And so people need to understand that too, because we often think that science is some hollowed, holy thing that involves people whose minds are far too intelligent for us to even be able to comprehend. They're on a whole nother level. They're on these pedestals that society has come to worship them, these great scientific minds. And a lot of what scientists do is very laudable, and they are brilliant people, absolutely brilliant people. But at the same time, just because they're brilliant, just because they work at CERN, just because they went to Harvard and Oxford and all these other Ivy League schools, does not mean that they are in any position whatsoever to evaluate whether or not their work is going to be used for occultic ends. Okay, for all those people, skeptics out there who have been slamming guys like us, Josh, who talk about CERN and occultic connections. So who are the people who are behind the scenes, who are wanting to maybe open gates, unlock wormholes, and peer into different dimensions? Well, the short answer is there's a human faction, not in my opinion, I think it's quite obvious. There's a human faction, there's a non-human faction, but that non-human faction is related to the human faction, and then there's a faction that is not related to the human faction at all, which you might consider to be let's just call it a fallen angelic faction. So there's pieces and parts that involve different kinds of entities, as strange as that may sound. On a human level, you've got the usual players. You've got, of course, what has been known as the NWO, New World Order, the Illuminati, these groups, which when you get to the core of who they are, they're priests. A lot of them are Luciferian priests. A lot of them are involved in the mystery schools. All of them are involved in the mystery schools at the higher levels. The mystery schools are nothing more than the teachings of the fallen angels. And when I say the teachings of the fallen angels, I'm not just talking about some kind of New Age teaching. We're talking about blueprints. We're talking about schematics. We're talking about technology. We're talking about hidden knowledge. We're talking about physics. We're talking about mathematics. We're talking about geological stuff. That's the kind of information that the mystery schools have. It's not just information concerning, again, New Age kind of things. It's not just satanic stuff, and it's not just mythical stuff. We are talking about nuts and bolts technology that the mystery schools, they have the information. They know where certain things are buried. They know where certain things, certain places on the earth are connected to certain things, are connected to certain entities. So that's that faction, the human level, the priests of power, if you like, the Luciferian priesthood, which absolutely exists. And then you've got the non-human aspects, which involve what I believe are entities that are not fully human, but are related to the human race, that are involved. And ultimately, again, on the top level, you have, of course, the devil. I think everybody who believes in the Bible is quite aware of the fact that Satan is called, Jesus called him the ruler of this world, or the ruler of this age. So
Absolutely.
he's obviously involved at the highest level.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on all that. And I think that's something that a lot of people, it's like one of two extremes. They either forget that part of it altogether, and we'll just totally put all their effort into demonizing the scientists and everything like that, or it'll be the other way, and it's all demons and fallen angels, and they forget that there is a human factor there too. So it's
You're right.
yeah, I think that the way that you break that down is really important, because it's a good balance of both. It's both. There's a lot of different conspiracy theories out there about CERN. Some more plausible than others. Which ones, if any, do you believe are valid, and why?
Well, like you said, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
I let me start off by saying that I go through a list of 6 different theoretical possibilities, and there are a lot more than just 6, but I go through 6 of the more common ones, which are that the activities of CERN are going to lead to either all of the following, or one of the following, or some of the following. The first one being black holes, which is the most famous concern regarding CERN, that has been made famous by people such as Stephen Hawking and people who are of a highly qualified scientific pedigree, such as Stephen Hawking. But you also have antimatter, the issue of antimatter and antimatter weapons, which is a very real concern, although not according to the scientists at CERN, because according to them, they cannot contain enough antimatter particles to do anything really useful with them yet. But one thing that we also need to understand, along with the technological imperative that we talked about before, to have a rational view here, is that technology is developing and is progressing exponentially, and has been for many years. And Ray Kurzweil breaks this down and makes it very evident that almost every realm of technology, especially information technology, but almost every realm of technology, including particle physics, and certainly quantum physics, is progressing exponentially. And so even though right now they claim at CERN that they can only contain a very small amount of antimatter, and they admit to being able to contain antimatter for 15 minutes. This comes from their own publications. They can contain it for 15 minutes, and they can contain, I don't remember the figures. It's a very minuscule amount of antimatter, but the fact is they can contain antimatter for 15 minutes within CERN. I believe within, I might be wrong, but I think within the Atlas device connected to CERN, but I may be wrong on that. So antimatter is a real concern for anybody that has any knowledge about the way that the military-industrial complex takes these theoretical ideas and then takes the first working models, takes that technology underground, incorporates it into technology that we already have that most of us are not aware of, and suddenly you talk about an exponential growth progression of that technology. The military-industrial complex can take the technology that CERN is producing, and within 3 years be light years ahead of CERN. That's another component people have to be aware of. You also have particle beam weapons, which particle beam weapons are a fact of life. I mean, we've already got the military has, our military, I believe our Navy has already demonstrated particle beam weapon technology that we have deployed on some of our battleships right now. We can direct particle beams. Right now, we can direct a stream of particles moving at high energies at aircraft. That's well known. That's already being deployed on the battlefield, and of course, that's what CERN does. CERN directs beams of particles and smashes them together. So the research at CERN is only going to magnify the potential of particle beam weapons. By the way, particle beam weapons, which are sometimes called high energy weapons, but high energy weapons can also involve just lasers. Particle beams are different. Particle beams actually use particles, subatomic particles or atomic particles, to tear things to pieces at the molecular level. So it's like basically the bird shot of a shotgun shell, ripping through a target, a paper target or something like that. That's kind of what particle beam weapons do, but at a obviously much higher velocities, near the speed of light. So particle beam weapons, it's widely believed, in fact, I believe that part of our arsenal against some of the unidentified craft, which a lot of it is identified at this point, flying around out there, we actually have some weapons that we're using to bring some of that stuff down. And one of the purported weapons kinds of weapons are particle beam weapons. It's rumored that under the United States, there's an underground accelerator whose sole purpose is to accelerate particles to be able to direct them up into the atmosphere to shoot down flying saucers, for lack of a better term. So that's very interesting. There's a lot involved there. Of course, there's time distortion in stargates, which is a big deal, that even the scientific community believes that possibly time can be distorted. A Stargate wormhole, a portal can be opened. Einstein's Rosen bridge, which I believe there's other ways to open those stargates too, but certainly quantum physics is part of the equation, and then CERN also would have the capability of opening a stargate, and there's some people who believe that. And then the DNA sequencing I find very interesting. I didn't know about that until I listened to Anthony Patch. The DNA sequencing and artificial synthesis. I had no idea that particle colliders were used to produce the X-ray or whatever it was that was able to penetrate into the cell and actually view the genome. I didn't know that. That was new information to me. Fascinating stuff. But finally, what really concerns most researchers who take a good look at CERN are strangelets. And I'm sure, Josh, you could probably talk for hours and hours and hours on strangelets, but strangelets are really scary because theoretically, strangelets are the most explosive substance in the known universe. And I thought strangelets were theoretical, again, until I listened to Anthony Patch and then followed up on some of the stuff he said, and found out that although a lot of scientists actually still think they're theoretical, they're not. We can actually produce the quark gluon plasma
Yeah.
within certain facilities, including the one, the Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because that's public knowledge. Like they came out with, that's not something that somebody just made up, or there's no possibility of that, because that's actually been in the news, and I mean, it's like a well-known thing, and it's so strange how willing they were to come out with that. Of course, they're not.
Right.
They're not going to call it strangelets or say that the Earth is going to burn to a cinder in under an hour. They're not going to say it like that. But when you look at what strangelets are and what the quark gluon plasma is, they go hand in hand. I mean, they're synonymous. It's like the same term for, or two different terms for the same thing. So yeah,
Right.
it's really interesting. I mean, it's almost been daily, like just on a daily basis, that new things are being discovered, or some weird new thing, or some new phenomenon that they're talking about at CERN. I know one of the big things that they're trying to prove, right now, is rainbow gravity theory. And the reason that they want to do that is, which basically, for the audience who might not know, it's a theory that says if they can create microscopic black holes at a certain low energy level, lower than what they would think is possible, it somehow mathematically is supposed to prove that higher spatial dimensions exist. But also, and this is why, like, we Christians should be aware of this, the other end of that is that it's supposed to prove that the universe is infinitely old, which means it didn't have a beginning, which means there was no creation, no creator. And that's, of course, that's what they want to, that's what they want to show, because then they're not held accountable to anybody. So I know that that's like on the top of their to-do list, and it's amazing how fast these developments are coming out. It's almost hard to keep track of.
It is.
Yeah.
It's even more amazing to consider that behind the scenes, a lot of the stuff that is theoretical and only exists on the chalkboards of these theoretical physicists has already been developed into working technology in the underground bases and is flying around in the atmosphere. So we have to also, that's another piece of rationale that we have to add into this, is to just take a logical approach and convince ourselves that the military-industrial complexes of the world are always going to be way ahead of whatever information might be available in the public arena, and that's just a given.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and that's important too. And that kind of leads to my next question. Where do you think that that the type of quantum technology that they're utilizing at places like the LHC and CERN, where do you think ultimately this is going to bring the world in coming decades? And do you believe that these things are actually foretold in the Bible?
Well, yes, they're foretold in a very general way. I have some friends that once told me, I tried to convince them that they're, concerning flying saucers and concerning anti-gravity and concerning some of the technologies that most definitely already exist, but they don't exist in the public sector. And their response to me was, well, if it's not in the Bible, I don't believe in it. In other words, the Bible doesn't talk about anti-gravity. The Bible doesn't talk about, bases on the moon or on Mars or whatever. And so I don't believe in it. And that's sort of the take that a lot of people, that a lot of Christians, the position that a lot of Christians assume, whether consciously or unconsciously. Well, I can't find a scripture that has anything to do with UFOs. Therefore, I will determine by some form of logic that therefore UFOs are irrelevant to my biblical view,
Right.
Which is obviously a flawed way of looking at things, because first of all, the Bible is is eerily specific concerning certain details, certain prophecies. If you go through the Old Testament especially, you'll find certain prophecies where, especially in the book of Daniel, that the very date, the very occurrence and date were predicted hundreds of years in advance for certain things. And so the Bible in some ways is exceptionally specific. But then in other ways, the Bible is amorphous. The Bible alludes to things, but without giving us many details. It's like seeing through a glass dimly, like somebody in the New Testament says concerning prophecy. So when it comes to a lot of the actual stuff, actual technologies that we're seeing coming to fruition, it's not necessarily that those technologies themselves are prophesied, but it's the end result. It's the end game that's prophesied that those technologies are culminating towards. In other words, for example, I can't find a single verse in the Bible that ever alluded to the fact that you and I would be driving automobiles or flying in airplanes.
Yeah, exactly.
But we can cite the verse that says that knowledge will increase. Men will go to and fro upon the earth. And one could extrapolate that is an indirect reference to the fact that we would have the internet, we would have digital books, that we would have the capability to get into an aircraft, a jet aircraft, and fly to the other side of the earth, in a 24-hour period. We can extrapolate that, and we may in fact be correct about the meaning of that about a potential meaning of that prophecy based on our extrapolation of the technology that we currently are utilizing. So that's the way people have to look at prophecy. Some prophecy, a lot of prophecy actually, concerning the times that are coming in the future, and perhaps some things that are occurring now, and probably things that have already occurred. It's the end game that we have to understand, and the end game is explicitly clear in the Bible. The Bible is very clear, whereas it's not very clear sometimes about specific prophetic things. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It is explicitly clear about the story, about the narrative, about how this thing began and where and how it's going to end. We know that for sure. For example, we know for sure, according to Scripture, that the devil is doomed. I mean, period. He's doomed. We know that. We don't have to speculate. We don't have to extrapolate. He is screwed. He's destined to be thrown into the lake of fire. He's also destined to be released for 1,000 years afterwards, and then thrown back into the lake of fire. Actually, I believe the first time he's not sure if he's thrown in the lake of fire the first time or if that's just ultimately. But anyway, the point is that is something where we don't need to extrapolate on. We don't need to extrapolate on the destiny, the doom of the devil. It is written in stone. It is a surety. I don't believe he believes that, but for those of us who put our faith in the Scriptures, we know that is a surety. We know that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords wins, that he ultimately returns and occupies the seat of David that was promised to him. We know that by faith in the Scriptures. We know that to be a certainty. So we know what the end game is. As a believer, if you believe in the Bible, then you know what the end game is. So if you have the information about where this is all headed, then it isn't difficult to then start to have an understanding of how all these pieces and parts fit together according to the end game. Part of the secret of unraveling, of understanding what it is that the devil actually wants, what is his prime objective, I believe is hidden within the second chapter of Psalms, in Psalm 2. And I end my analysis on it because I believe it directly relates to CERN and correlates with CERN. Because according to Psalm 2, and we know, by the way, that the Psalms are prophecies because Jesus refers to them as prophecy, and so do the apostles, directly quoting from the Psalms as prophecy. So Psalm 2 paints a picture of the nations that are involved in the kings of the earth are involved in a conspiracy against the Lord, but also against his anointed, capital A, his anointed, Jesus. And the beginning of Psalm 2 says, "Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together," or plot together, "against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us." Now that phrase, "let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us," I found an interesting correlation to the activities at CERN. Because what CERN is actually doing, laying aside all of the conspiratorial stuff, laying aside all of the speculative stuff, what CERN is actually, and I don't know if people caught this in my video, it was kind of inferred and hidden in a way. But what I was trying to do was to show people that that verse may be directly referring to what the human race is actively doing right now, which is we are trying to literally break the bonds of the material world. Literally. That isn't conspiratorial, that isn't speculative. That is precisely why we are accelerating protons to almost the speed of light and then smashing them into each other. The reason why we have to do that is because that's the only way that we know how to break them apart. We have to, it's actually quite a primitive idea incorporated into the most complex machine that we know of. Very primitive idea, smash things, but with this incredibly complex technology behind it. We're smashing the protons together in order to break the bonds that hold the subatomic world together. That's exactly what we're doing. And casting away the cords that make the physical world what it is. And that is a very simplistic, but yet a very realistic way of describing what CERN is doing. They're smashing protons together in order to break them apart. And their stated goal is to understand what it is that holds them together in the first place. So that isn't speculative, and that may be directly prophesied in Psalm 2. Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us, referring to the kings of the earth who are plotting against who? The Lord and his anointed. So we have a couple of things in here that we can understand just in the first couple verses of Psalm 2. The rulers are taking counsel together. In other words, they are conspiring. In fact, that's what some of the versions, some of the translations say. The rulers of the earth or the kings of the earth are conspiring together against the Lord. In other words, against the Father and against his Son, Jesus, the anointed one. And why are they conferring together against the Lord? First of all, it's interesting to note in Psalm 2 that they know who he is. This isn't a bunch of atheists trying to figure out something about the Big Bang. This is a conspiracy involving the rulers who know who the Lord is, and furthermore, who his anointed is. In other words, they know who the Father is, and they know who the Son is. And they know that the Son has a promised empire, if you will, a promised kingdom on the earth, that he will occupy a throne. And they don't like that idea at all. They want to enthrone somebody else. They do not like the Lord or his anointed, and in fact are conspiring to make war with him. And so if we extrapolate this idea out and we read the next verses, which are, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us, and we add in what's happening at CERN suddenly the big picture starts to come into view, according to Psalm 2, in my opinion, is that what we have, the grand conspiracy, ultimately, is to figure out a way to make war with God. Now, that's ludicrous, right? That's absolutely ludicrous. It's even asinine, right? According to a lot of the commenters that you find on YouTube and on the internet. It's completely asinine to even conceive of such a thing. Well, I'm glad they agree with God's opinion of the whole idea, because the next verses say, he who sits in the heavens shall laugh. God is laughing at this idea, this notion. The Lord shall hold them in derision. In other words, he's not real. He's laughing, and he's not very happy about this idea that they have. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. And this is the statement that the Lord makes. This is the Lord making a statement about this plot, this conspiracy, that the rulers of the earth are conspiring against the Lord and his anointed. This is the Father's response, okay? And this tells us, his response gives us a clue about exactly what they're conspiring, because here comes his response. Yet have I set my king on my holy hill of Zion. So the Father is laughing at their conspiracy, and his response to them is, I have my king. He is going to sit on my holy hill, and there's nothing that you can do to change that fact. So, what are the kings of the earth conspiring against the Lord and against his anointed? To usurp the throne of the anointed king, Jesus, the King of kings and the Lord of lords, who is coming to occupy a throne. Again, we know that that is true if we believe in the Bible, because the end of the story, at the very end of the Bible, in the book of Revelations and in the last chapters of the book of Revelations, Jesus is sitting on the throne, and he is ruling over the earth, and he is dashing the nations to pieces with a rod of iron and dashing them like pottery. And that's the end game. And then after that, of course, the new heavens and the new earth, and the New Jerusalem descends from heaven. And the most astounding, I believe the most astounding statement in the scriptures is made. Now the habitation of God is with men. Close the book. End of story. Game over. So we know where it's going. And the Bible gives us clues about this conspiracy that is afoot and that is going to be launched and hatched in the coming days, and I believe is already underway, to dethrone Jesus, to usurp. Dethrone isn't the best word, because Jesus hasn't occupied the throne of David yet. It's been promised to him, but he has not yet occupied it. That is a prophecy that has yet to be fulfilled. So they're hoping to usurp, is the word. Usurp that throne. Usurp the governance of the earth. That's the conspiracy. And they want to make war on God to do it. They believe, the controllers, the Luciferian elite, they believe that the technologies that are coming out, that they're exploring and developing, not just in CERN, but in the underground bases, and I would suggest off planet, that they are developing the weapons with which to make war on God, to make war with enemies that are not even human. And number one, they're hoping to develop the technology to do that, to actually make war with God. But number two, they're hoping, and this is the second part of the grand conspiracy, they're hoping to unlock the entities, unchain the entities that are capable of leading them in such a war with God. And obviously, the devil plays a role in that too, perhaps the primary role. But there are other entities that they're interested in unleashing to guide them, to lead them in a war against God. So to close this monologue out here, what do we have? What is the grand conspiracy? Summed up in Psalm 2 is, it's summed up in a question I used to ask my friends all the time. What kind of weapons do the rulers of the earth bring to a war with God? What kind of weapons? Well, the kind of weapons that might be under development right now because of quantum physics, because of quantum mechanics, because of CERN, because of the potential to open the gates, to bring back the gods from the golden age that will lead us in an epic war against God. Not lead us, but lead them in an epic war against God. They believe they have the technology, and they believe that they have the leadership, the entities that are capable of leading them in this war. That's these things combined are giving them the confidence. And to me, that's the final end game of what they're hoping to accomplish with CERN.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, I'll never read Psalm 2 the same again. That is mind-blowing stuff, and we certainly serve an amazing God. And it always blows my mind when I try to consider the psychology behind the enemy. Behind even the human counterpart, that they actually think that this is something that they can accomplish. And of course, they're under massive delusion on who God is, because they think that he's somebody that can be beat, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And that that actually kind of leads to some of your other work, because in the ancient past, there was a biblical figure that thought the same thing, Nimrod. Do you believe that the things that they're doing at CERN, or something similar, has been done in the ancient past? Or in other words, do you believe that ancient people had access to advanced technology that would be similar or maybe even more advanced than we have today?
Yes, but we need to delve into something. We need to dive down a rabbit hole to answer that question.
Absolutely.
The short answer is yes. But they were using a different kind of technology than we're using now. There are two different divergent streams of technology, probably more than that, but two main divergent streams of technology that are in operation on the earth that human beings are working with. One of those streams of technology is in the mainstream. The other stream of that technology is quite literally under the ground. And the point of divergence, the key to understanding the point of divergence in the modern era is Nikola Tesla. There is the electromagnetic model of the universe, and then there's the gravitical model of the universe. And the two figureheads are, of course, Nikola Tesla on the one hand and Albert Einstein on the other. Both of those technologies have to do with quantum physics and some other scientific fields. But the fact is that we're using Newtonian technology. We have an understanding of a very limited physics in the public arena. And this limited physics that we're using, it gets us a lot of toys. See, we can develop a lot of toys using the public technologies, using the public sciences, using that one stream of mainstream technology. So we can develop, for example, the conventional weapons of war that we see on the battlefield, the rockets, the tanks, the submarines. We can do what we're doing now, utilize the internet. We can have television. We can have our smartphones. We can have all kinds of very interesting and useful technologies. But in order to tap into the kind of technology that the ancients were using, it would require us to have an understanding and to be utilizing the underground stream of science that the public is not only unaware of, but that is considered forbidden for the profane to even be involved in. And for those who are wondering, yes, all of us are the profane. Those who are not initiated into the mysteries are profane. We're base. We're stupid. And that includes Stephen Hawking. That included Albert Einstein. That, unless they were initiated in the mysteries, which I don't think they were, that includes the brightest minds today are considered by the true elite as being profane, as being base, as being stupid, as being uninformed. Yes, the greatest scientific minds in the public sector, most of them are uninitiated. Most of them know very, very little about real science. The true knowledge is hidden, always has been. And that true knowledge is, again, not just metaphysic knowledge, not just New Agey knowledge. That true knowledge is nuts and bolts technology. And it is being incorporated in black budget projects all over the earth, underground bases, and all kinds of stuff happening, both, in my opinion, on and off planet. Therefore, in order to understand the kind of technology that was being used in the ancient world, we have to think outside of the mainstream scientific box. We have a lot of technologies that are superfluous. We have a lot of technologies that are frivolous, right? We have a lot of technologies such as our iPhones and our iPads and the way that most people use the internet. If you really take a good hard look at technological development over the last 20 years, most of the development is happening in the arena of the kind of technology that we want as opposed to the kind of technology that we need. And there's a big difference.
Right.
See, we're not demanding the kind of technology that we need. We're not demanding the kind of technology that can feed everybody in the world. We're not demanding the kind of technology that can provide clean drinking water for everybody in the world. We're not demanding the kind of technology that can provide free energy for everybody in the world. No. We're demanding better smartphones. We're demanding better video games. We're demanding higher definition televisions. See? This is something that has been engineered. It's social engineering. We have been engineered to desire the toys, and to understand that the technology exists to make our toys better, bigger, better, funner, brighter, whatever. See, that's how our brains have been programmed. And so we're focused on the gadgets that make life funner and more comfortable for the few of us that are privileged enough in the Western world to use them. And that keeps us distracted from understanding that there's a whole nother realm of science that could provide the kind of technologies that could solve the things I just mentioned, right? They don't want us to understand that. They don't want us to think about that. Don't look over here at the electromagnetic devices and the underground magneto-leviton train that can get you coast to coast in a half an hour. Don't look over here at the technology that's using what appears to be anti-gravitical properties or what have you. Don't look at all this stuff. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make your life any more entertaining, so it doesn't make a difference. Don't look at it. It doesn't exist. Just focus on, let's figure out what the Big Bang was all about, right? Let's go figure out these things that are already well known on the other side, in the other stream of science. They're already well known. Not only are they well known, not of course the Big Bang. Those guys know that the Big Bang is a big load of you-know-what. But you get the gist of what I'm saying. So there's two different streams of science happening. And we've got to tear ourselves away from the Newtonian, Einstein-based science and understand that there's a whole nother arena, the electromagnetic Tesla universe model that opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. And that's the kind of technology that the ancients were most likely using, and in my opinion, were using, because that's the kind of technology that has primarily come from non-human sources. We know that Tesla, for example, claimed to be in contact with entities. He thought they were good entities at first, and then people believe he went over to the dark side. I think he was on the dark side the whole time, in my opinion. But he was getting information. We have reason to believe that the Nazis were getting information from otherworldly entities. Again, not just information concerning New Agey stuff, but nuts and bolts hardware, schematics to build stuff, that they were getting information from non-human sources. That's the technology that the ancients were in possession of. That's the high technology. It's not we have mechanical technology today. We make things explode. We're really, really good at making things explode. That's how we make a car move. We just create a bunch of little explosions, and that's how we make a car move. That's how we make a rocket go up in the air. We blow things up. We're really good at blowing things up. It's like we've become masters at blowing things up, but that's a very base form of technology. We shouldn't pat ourselves on the back because we figured out how to blow things up really well. The real technology is utilizing physics that don't need to blow things up to create propulsion. And the reason why I'm so adamant about this, Josh, is because I saw this. I've seen some of this technology with my own eyes, and I have witnesses to it, and I know it exists. And so I'm a witness, and I can tell you that this stuff is real, and it really ticks me off. For example, I sat down with a physicist one time, a friend of mine, good friend of mine, who has I believe she either has or she's working on a PhD in physics, in physics. And I tried to describe to her something that I saw 50 feet above my head, and she was in complete denial about it because the physics for this thing don't exist in conventional science. And therefore, since the physics don't exist in conventional science, I must have been delusional or mistaken about what I saw. You see, that's the disconnect. When the truth is that what I saw is based on physics that comes not from the future, not from a Star Trek kind of future, but from a very distant antediluvian past.
Absolutely. Can you tell us what you saw?
Yes, I've said on the radio a handful of times that I saw a craft, very large craft. Well, I shouldn't say very large. It was the size of the size of like a fighter jet. So it wasn't very large. Very large is like a mile long, mile wide craft. This thing was hovering above my car, about 50 feet in the air. It was nighttime, but the thing was lit up. It had triangular lights. It didn't have any propulsion system to speak of that I could tell. Me and my brother-in-law had our windows rolled down. Both of us were aware of anti-gravitical, the possibility of anti-gravitical technology and electromagnetism and all this kind of stuff that is supposedly involved in flying saucers. So we had enough sense to roll our windows down to confirm that there was no sound whatsoever coming from this craft, completely silent, moving in the air, gyrating in the air in this fashion, and just sort of moving around like this, since we have a webcam here. And it was obviously, it wasn't some kind of a balloon or something like that. It was obviously a military piece of military hardware. It had body armor that was grayish green. And it was, and I can only explain that the body armor was very reminiscent of the kind of body armor that's on the Batmobile in the new Batman series, the Batman Begins movie. The Batmobile in that movie has like this sort of angular body armor, if you remember, and that's the kind of body armor this thing had. And it had little stubby. It wasn't an airplane. It wasn't shaped like an airplane. It was shaped more like a saucer or a triangular craft, but it had little stubby things on the sides that weren't large enough to be wings, but it sort of had the shape of a plane, but it wasn't an airplane, and it wasn't a helicopter. It had the lights were triangular. They were white triangular lights, and then it had other color lights on it as well. And it was literally descending over my car, and we're looking up through my windshield at it with our jaws dropped, and this thing is literally just descending over us. It was about 50 feet up in the air and probably descended even lower, maybe even 20 feet above our heads, 30 feet above our heads. So we had a really good look at it for at least 30 seconds. And so there, again, it had no propulsion system, no propellers. There was no sound coming from it. And of course, Harrier jets, people are familiar with Harrier jets that can take off from a stationary position and that can rise in the air. But if you've ever seen, go online for people who are skeptical, go online, type in Harrier jet, watch a Harrier jet take off. Watch how a Harrier jet, when it takes off, when it lifts off, it will literally blow cars out of the way because it has to produce that much propulsion in order to get off the ground. Well, obviously, this craft was not using that kind of propulsionary mechanism. This craft was using something that it didn't require propellers, it didn't require explosions, it didn't require any kind of propulsion, conventional propulsion whatsoever. So it's very interesting that I observed this craft right in the midst of a time in my life that I and my brother-in-law were very curious about potential propulsionary systems related to UFOs, related to secret government, reverse engineered craft. Right in the midst of that time, I guess you could say that research interest in my life, right in the midst of that is when I saw this craft. And I had the distinct feeling, as did my brother-in-law, that we were supposed to be there and we were supposed to see it for some reason.
Wow, so that's mind-blowing. That's that must have.
I can tell you it's real.
Yeah. I haven't personally seen anything like that, but my wife has. She's seen craft that was actually. She saw a craft that was actually close enough that she could see into the window and actually see a non-human entity, staring right at her. Wow. She saw that. I think she was 14 when she saw that. And, that's why I really appreciate, researchers like yourself and others out there that are willing to, because the church as a whole ignores this stuff. They don't, kind of like what we talked about before, they don't want to deal with it or think about it. Even like how you said your friend who's becoming a physicist didn't want to deal with it either because it goes against. I mean, it's and this is something that I've written about in a lot of ways. Science has almost become like a religion, in a lot of different ways, and
it has.
It's insane. And of course they'll never put it that way, but that's what it is, because if you say anything that goes against it, I mean, there's an emotional response a lot of times. So, with people that witness these things, it leaves them with no place really to go. They have to go where they'll be heard, and it's usually New Age or something like that. And because I haven't had like experience with craft or aliens, whatever word that people want to put label them as. But I've had a lot of spiritual manifestations and attacks and stuff. And at the time, this was years and years ago, I didn't know what to do with it. I was raised really traditional Baptist, so the church I was in, they just didn't deal with that stuff. They'd be like, well, you're probably just having a bad dream or something, and it wasn't that. So because of that, and to no fault, it's my own fault. I'm not trying to like put the blame on anybody else or anything, but instead of going and looking in the Bible, like what it up, New Age theology and taking that path, and it about destroyed my life. And I mean, I've known people.
What kind of theology? You cut out there for a minute.
Oh, a new age theology.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I got real heavy into like astral projection and all that sort of
right.
Really weird esoteric stuff. And luckily, thanks be to God, that God brought me back. And but I mean, I've known people that have fallen away from the church, and they're not given an answer when they really need one, and then they fall away forever, or they don't end up coming back, and it gets to the point where they're denying Jesus, and I mean, like, really bad stuff. And so I mean, all that to say that I'm glad that there's at least one faction of Christianity that's willing to deal with this stuff, and people like us that we can actually write about this stuff and talk about this stuff, and know that there are going to be people that watch this that are going to be able to be helped, because so many people have experiences like that. So I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I do appreciate you sharing your. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing your experience, because I know a ton of people have had similar things, and they don't know how to process it from a biblical lens.
Yes, and let's let's draw some conclusions from, for example, let's draw some conclusions real quick for people from the kind of craft that your wife saw and what I saw. Okay. We both had, we probably were both close enough to throw a stone at this thing, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually saw the windshield also, but it was darkened. So somebody was in there. I had the distinct feeling that it was human, that it was reverse engineered. But I am well aware of the fact that there's a lot of stuff flying around that's not occupied by human beings. Now, let's take this to the next level. Again, let's draw some conclusions, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people will stop right there, and because they're afraid of it, or because they don't understand, or because they don't want to go any deeper, they'll take out this convenient stamp that has the word Nephilim written on the bottom, and they'll stamp the whole issue just Nephilim and move on. I can't do that. My mind doesn't work that way. I have to extrapolate everything out as far as I can take it. Now, if this craft that I saw and that your wife saw is real, then that means that these things are being manufactured, fabricated, right? I think that's I think we're entitled to that inference. They're being manufactured. They didn't just pop out of thin air, especially if there's human pilots inside of there, which there probably was in my case. Didn't just it's not a spiritual machine. Like I said, I feel like I could have thrown a rock at it, okay, and it probably would have bounced off or something, because it was physical.
Yeah.
And I've encountered things that aren't physical, but this was physical. Okay. So it had to have been manufactured. Okay. Well, if it had to be manufactured, then obviously means, first of all, it's physical. So it's made of some kind of physical component. Second of all, had to be manufactured, which leads us to the third point. It had to be manufactured in some kind of facility for manufacturing it. Okay, so it's physical, had to be manufactured, which leads us to the idea that it had to be manufactured somewhere. Okay, so some kind of facility with equipment appropriate to manufacturing the thing, which then leads us to the next point, which is, okay, then that means that there has to be some kind of a faction, whether it be military, whether it be human, non-human. There has to be a faction that's behind the creation of the equipment that is necessary to manufacture the craft, which then points us back to the idea of civilization. There is some kind of civilization back there in the works that has a reason to manufacture these things, that has a reason to build the tools and to build the facility to manufacture these things so that they can fly around in the air, right? Okay. Fine. Well, on the human level, we understand that that's obvious. We have reasons why we would do that. We have the military-industrial complex. We have the black budget projects. We have the desire for military supremacy, secret technology, blah, blah, blah. That's easy to figure out. So you take the human route, that's easy to figure out, regardless of where they got the technology from. The answer of why they have it is easy to understand. It's the other side that starts to get a little bit confusing. Because now if we're dealing with non-human entities that are manufacturing stuff, physical stuff, that have to have facilities to manufacture this stuff somewhere, then you're dealing with a civilization. There's got to be a group of these things manufacturing. And that opens up a whole nother situation, because is this a civilization without culture? Is this just some sort of a spiritual phenomenon, or are we dealing with something far more complex than any of us can even really truly imagine? I think that is probably the answer, unfortunately, at the end of the day, unfortunately for researchers, because it's very difficult to pin any kind of hard information down when you're dealing with something so complex. Just when you think you figured something out, you realize that it's only one spoke in one wheel of a machine that has 1 billion wheels on it. And so, and that's an eternal frustration for anybody who tries to research this kind of stuff, because it's so complex. So if we've got a non-human entity driving around in a piece of hardware, then we know that that piece of hardware was fabricated. It didn't just poof out of thin air. Maybe there is some spiritual stuff out there masquerading as a UFO, but I think that would be the minority. I think the majority is is nuts and bolts hardware that you can shoot down if you've got the right equipment. I believe that the entities that are driving a lot of these things, you can shoot them in the face and they will drop dead. Yeah. So we're dealing with corporeal creatures, at least in some cases, that have the ability to create things, that have therefore some kind of a civilized structure. And now we have to ask the question, what does that mean in a biblical context? And that's why people want to just take that word Nephilim and just stamp it onto the whole UFO thing, the whole alien thing, and walk away. Because I think people feel like they have this idea in the back of their minds that if they go any further, they're going to get outside of a biblical context. That the only way to stay inside of a biblical context is to use the word Nephilim, which I think is not true. I believe that we have to understand, first and foremost, that everything is solidly anchored to the gospel of Jesus Christ, not from a religious viewpoint, not from a doctrinal viewpoint, but literally anchored to Jesus. Everything is anchored to the fact that Jesus is who he says he is, that the gospel concerning him is true. That is what everything is anchored on. And in fact, it is the only anchor that you can use. It's the only post that you can tie yourself to in order for everything else to make sense. A lot of people think it's quite the opposite, that if you take what they would call a religious viewpoint, when I say a lot of people, I'm referring to a lot of ufologists out there, some of whom might even come across this broadcast, that if you take a quote-unquote religious standpoint, that you're cornering yourself, that you're forcing yourself into a corner that is only going to have a very narrow perspective. Wrong. The only way that you can make sense of any of this is if you can anchor yourself to the reason why it's all happening in the first place. The beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. It is because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is the why. It is the beginning and the end. It gives us every aspect of this whole thing. It gives us the reason. It gives us the underlying principles, and the underlying questions are answered without answering maybe the specifics. Again, the Bible addresses the end game very clearly, and it addresses who the Lord is very clearly. So, working from that kind of an understanding, we ought not be anchored from that position. We ought not be afraid to delve deeper into this idea of aliens. Now, let me take the word alien for a minute. A lot of people don't like the word alien. I like it. The reason why I like it is because it is the most appropriate word in my mind. Alien is referencing something that is not human. It's not like us. It is alien to us. The word alien is a word that is used to reference something as it relates to us, to ourselves. So if we say an alien being, we're talking about something that is not us. It's not us. It's not human. Therefore, it is alien. I don't mind the term alien. I think it is quite appropriate.
Yeah.
I believe that most of the stuff going on, most of the creatures that are in play that have to do with the whole UFO phenomenon have their origins on the earth in the past. Maybe not all of them, but most of them. Setting aside the angelic players. I'm talking about the corporeal creatures. I'm talking about the flesh and blood, at least partly flesh and blood entities that are building things, have their origins in the antediluvian world. have their origins in the Golden Age, in the time before the flood of Noah, when the Watchers descended in the days of Jared, whose name means descend, and began to mingle themselves with the human race on a genetic level. But also, interestingly enough, I also believe there was something already genetically going on before they arrived on the scene through the line of Cain, but we won't get into that. And I leave open the possibility, and indeed subscribe to the notion, that there was something pre-Adamic happening on the earth. Yeah. In other words, pre-human. I absolutely believe, others don't, I respect their opinions, I happen to believe that Adam was the first human being through whom we all come. Yeah. I happen to believe that. And I say it that way because there are a lot of sincere Christians who don't, but who do believe in Jesus and in the work of the cross and so forth. That's okay. They're entitled to that opinion, and I understand some of the conclusions that they draw. However, I myself am very confident about the fact that Adam was the first human being. I'm also quite confident about the fact that Adam was not the first sentient entity to inhabit the earth.
Absolutely.
Now I know that and again, I want to exclude, everybody can take the angel factor off the table, because obviously this amorphous group of beings called angels existed before humans. Mm-hmm. There's no argument. I mean, they were there. They shouted for joy when the earth was created. The Benai Elohim shouted for joy when the earth was created. By the way, the New Testament tells us that the earth was created, that the creation came through Jesus. And, absolutely. And it was not only through Jesus, it was for Jesus. And to people interested in quantum physics, all things are held together in Jesus. So there's the answer to what they're looking for, ostensibly what they're looking for at CERN. Of course, they would all laugh at that, but that's the biblical answer. Jesus is all things consist. All things are consist in him. All things came through him, and all things exist for him. So that's why Jesus is the anchor. It's the best anchor. There is no better anchor for understanding any of this. It is to understand Christ, the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is the anchor. So to this idea that Adam, in my mind, and I believe biblically speaking, was the first human being, and the creation of man was a seminal point in the grand scheme of all things that exist. The creation of man was not just a blip on the radar. The creation of man was a stop and watch event. Take notice event for all the entities that existed before man was created. That, I believe, is evident. God decided to do something for the first time when he created us, at least when he created our progenitor, Adam. He decided to do something very unique, and that gives everybody a clue why we are so despised by all these other things that exist outside of us. Something very unique about the human race. There's something very cherished about the human race. Obviously, we know that the Bible says we were created in God's image. Now, I believe that means something very specific, but it's why we're so despised, and we are despised. Why we're so despised by the let's just call them the fallen entities, the great host of fallen entities that exist of all shapes and sizes and kinds. Why they hate us so much is because God loves us so much, because we were so cherished that he did something for the first time when he created us. And let me just say that the devil was not very excited about Adam. I think that's self-evident. But I'm talking a lot here, Josh. Why don't you jump in? I'm sure you probably have a bunch of thoughts here concerning the things I'm saying.
I honestly, I'm just having a good time listening to you. I mean, this stuff is so fascinating, and that's what I love about doing a show like this is, it's not called the sharpening report for, by accident. We're to sharpen one another, and I know I certainly don't have all the answers. And that's why I love being able to do a show like this and have a guest like you on, because I get to learn too, right along with the audience. And this is honestly, like, not putting any of my other guests down at all, but this so far has been like one of my favorite episodes in recent sharpening history. And I mean, you're blowing my mind.
No, I appreciate you saying that.
Well,
I'm glad that I'm not coming off as excruciatingly boring.
No, not at all. Just the opposite. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And actually, you know what? I was raised in the whole Baptist mindset, so it was, there was kind of like this vague idea that, maybe angels, or that, probably angels existed before Adam. But if anybody, like, in that mindset, if anybody was to say that there was like anything really, unless you're talking about an angel or something, before Adam, and even then it was like, well, the angels were probably created like a day before Adam was, or 2 days, or something like that. That was kind of the idea. And then so I was raised that way, and at the time it kind of made sense, but I didn't really question it, because we were kind of taught not to really question things too much. But then years and years and years later, I came across the work of David Flynn, and that changed my mind. That totally blew my mind.
It was right there.
And I'm sure you're
the collected works of David Flynn, right there, right on my desk.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that it blew my mind. It changed my mind on so many different things. It made me it made me seriously consider the old Earth model, because I've always been like a young Earth guy, but I used to be like so behemoth, like just so like opposed to any other view that I wouldn't even bother. I mean, at that time, I and this was when I was like maybe 20 or something. I was young, but at that time I was like, well, if somebody doesn't believe in a young Earth creation, then they have to be an evolutionist, and they must be basically not a Christian. And that was my weird, ridiculous mindset at the time. But God really opened my eyes on a lot of things. He used David Flynn's work to really get me looking at things in a new way, and at least open that there's another way, another possibility out there. And that's with a lot of things. Like, I used to be really, really hardcore pre-trib rapture, and I still am pre-trib, but I'm not like to the point where it's got to be pre-trib. The other views, those are just lies from the pits of hell.
You're not anathematizing people who aren't pre-trib.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, some of the best conversations that I've had, even on this show, have been with people who are pre-wrath, or people that know how to talk and not argue. And I've never really gotten into an argument about it, because to me, there's so much mystery around it. It's not worth it. Nobody can conclusively say that it's one or the other. Right now on this side of the rapture, whenever it's going to be, it's speculative, and a lot of things that we research are, and but that's why I like having conversations like this. And I'm really thankful to God that He opened my heart to make me more, less prideful, and more willing to look at how other people see things, because I've certainly learned a lot. And another person, talking about Dave Flynn, another person that really has blown my mind is Mark Flynn, and I have his book.
As do
Forbidden
I.
Secret. Yeah, it is phenomenal. I did a interview with him, a whole 3-part series, and went on for I think like 4 or 5 hours or something, and absolutely phenomenal. And that it's one of those books that you you read it and it's like it gives you a new pair of glasses almost to see the world through. And I've referenced that a lot too. But anyway, all that to say, I that's what I love about listening to people like you and, all the other researchers out there. And I mean, I hope that I have that impact on people too. But that's what's great about doing a show like this. So I appreciate that you're open enough to talk about this stuff and share all your opinions, yet still be sensitive to the fact that there are the people that believe things differently. And that I think it's a rare quality nowadays that it's not seen a whole lot in a lot of people. That type of I don't know, humility or humbleness, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, so I really appreciate that. So I think I've flattered you enough.
I appreciate that, and my comment is likewise. I appreciate your work and everybody else out there. Too many times people go around anathematizing each other, damning each other. If you're not pre-trib, or if you are pre-trib, or if you believe this or that, the other. But I actually was just telling my wife last night that we have so many enemies. All you got to do is look at the comments on the videos. We have so many enemies that would love to absolutely destroy each of us. Real enemies that hate the gospel, that hate the fact that we would even dare talk about fields of science outside of conventional science and so forth. That we don't have the we really don't even have the luxury to criticize each other. We ought to be finding as much common ground among one another and linking up as tightly as we can to be able to confront the real adversary and the real adversarial power that is coming against us collectively. And one of the things that bothers me so much in this very small, tightly knit prophecy niche that so many of us are involved in is the great conflicts that arise over the smallest issues that keep people divided, that keep people from really interacting and making a collective thrust against the real adversaries. But something that I learned that really opened my eyes was we many times Christians have by nature a very humanistic perspective on the Bible. We view the Bible obviously through the lens of humanity. That's how we view the Bible. That's how we read the Bible. That's how we're taught to view the Bible. That's how we're taught to view everything, actually, is through the lens of humanity. We have a human-centric perspective. But the truth is that is a faulty way, an erroneous way to approach the scriptures and to approach anything, whether it be science, whether it be literature, whether it be art, anything. We approach it from a flawed perspective, which is the human perspective, a terribly flawed perspective. The only way to truly begin to see the big picture and to understand and to be open to the idea, for example, that there is a pre-Adamic age, is if we stop viewing ourselves as the most important piece of the puzzle. It is so hard for people to conceive a universe in which we are not present. And that is because of pride. Yeah. And that is because we have an inflated view of humanity, even though I just got done saying that something very special happened with us. That's true. But we don't have, so there's a difference between having the appreciation that something very special happened to us, that when Adam was created, it was something very unique. There's a difference between appreciating that fact and then having pride and being arrogant to the degree that we cannot imagine anything having a reason having a purpose that doesn't have to do with us. That's anti-biblical, because according to scriptures, the Bible is not about, it doesn't revolve around us. Neither does the universe, neither does the earth, neither do the events of heaven, the activities of heaven. Very clearly, everything, all things revolve around the Father and his Son. All things, specifically around Jesus. That's what the Bible tells us very clearly in the New Testament. Jesus is the apple of his Father's eye. Not me, not you. When you boil it down, we don't really understand. We do not grasp how much the Father loves his Son. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him. That's what he told the disciples after the Mount of Transfiguration ordeal. This is my beloved Son. Remember, they saw, who was it that they saw? Elijah and I think Moses, right?
Yeah.
And they wanted to build a tabernacle for them, and they were all caught up in this whole thing of seeing this vision of Jesus being ministered to by these individuals. And suddenly there's a bright light and they hear the voice of God. This is my beloved Son. Hear him. And they look up, and what did they see? Only Jesus at that point. That's the way we ought to view Scripture. That's the way we ought to view the universe. This is my beloved Son. That's what we're being told through creation, through Scripture. Hear him. And we have to get away from having a humanistic perception of everything. We have to have a Christ-centric perspective. A Christ-centered perspective on everything is going to give us the proper view, no matter what issue we're tackling, no matter what theological or scientific issue arises. If you have a Christ-centric perspective, all the pieces fall into place, because it's not about you and I. It is about him. He is the why. He's the centerpiece. He's the cornerstone of why everything is happening. It's him, not me. It's him. And that's why I can consider, for example, a pre-Adamic age, because it doesn't change the gospel. It makes no difference. It only changes our place in the timeline of history. And for a lot of Christians, that's not an option. We have to be at the center of things. If we're not at the center of things, then it's hard for them to receive or even to understand or even receive the gospel, because it's a human-centric perspective. It is faulted from the beginning. But if you have a Christ-centric perspective, you can think about a pre-Adamic age. If you have a Christ-centered perspective, flying saucers and aliens don't bother you. It does not change the gospel. It does not change who Jesus is or what he did or what we are. It doesn't change it. And neither does a pre-trib rapture or a post-trib rapture or any of that kind of stuff change the fact of who is this man. The primal question that is being posed to us and answered throughout Scripture from Genesis to Revelations. He is the beginning, he is the Alpha, and he is the end. He is the Omega. He is the chapter 1 of Genesis to chapter whatever it is of Revelations. He is the beginning, the opening, and the closing of the book, period. And once we become comfortable with that kind of a perspective, then we are grounded on solid and into a solid foundation. We are anchored into Christ. We are not bothered by other sentient entities being in the mix and having a role. Doesn't bother us, because it doesn't matter. The gospel isn't about me, it's about him. And yes, I'm a human being, and therefore the scriptures are laying out what I am, where I came from, what we've become, and why we need him, and what he does for us in his benevolence and grace. And that's what it is. It's just grace. He didn't have to do it, you know. I mean, I wouldn't have if I was God. Of course, that's a futile statement, but certainly from a human perspective, we would never give the kind of grace and mercy and forgiveness to creatures such as ourselves. So it's not even valid to approach the Bible from a human perspective. We have a human-centric perspective. We're human, so that's the perspective we have. But I'm saying we're not at the center. We're not at the center. We don't make the universe work. It doesn't exist for us. The flower on the bottom of the ocean isn't there because human beings love beauty. It's there because the Father loves his Son. All things were created for him and through him. And so what I'm saying is people ought not be afraid to venture into these ideas. Anchor yourself in the gospel. Anchor yourself in Christ. Know who you are. Know why you need salvation. That's something that so many believers have forgotten or can't even answer that question. What are you being saved from? What's your problem? Why do you need a Savior? Well, if you can't answer that question, then you don't have an understanding of the gospel. And furthermore, if you can't answer that question, then there's no way you can understand what's happening on the earth. There's no way. You've got to understand the human condition and how the human condition fits into everything else that's happening in regards to the stuff we've been talking about today. So, people say they're pre-trib, they're post-trib, they're mid-trib. I'm pre-flood, man. I am pre-flood.
Yeah.
Because for me, we have got to understand what happened in the world before the flood of Noah if we're going to have any idea whatsoever about what is going on now and what is coming. Because going back to CERN, this grand conspiracy I was referring to make war on God and to release these entities that are bound, to open the gates and release them, is at the center of this is the desire to restore and resurrect the golden age. And the golden age is the time when the gods were with men, were among men, and mingled themselves with men. It's the narrative of Genesis 6, except for the Luciferians. The way that they view the golden age was a time of bliss. That's the way they view it. It was a time when the gods were among men, teaching mankind and were benevolent, and that mankind was prospering under the gods, and there wasn't war, and there wasn't famine, and there wasn't pain, and there wasn't death, by the way. That's the golden age to them, see? But the truth is that the golden age to those of us who know the truth and who read the scriptures and who understand the narrative of not only Genesis 6, but of the book of Enoch and the book of Giants and all the other ancient texts that refer to the true context of the golden age. It was not a time when you wanted to be a human being on this earth. It was a time of great destruction. It was a time of great bloodshed. It was a time of great sorcery and wanton wickedness on the earth, so much so that the earth had to be destroyed by a flood. A time of genetic corruption, monsters and demonic creatures, the likes of which we can't even properly portray in movies. I mean, it's no wonder men's hearts will fail them for looking after those things which are coming upon the earth. And because there is a resurrection, there is a institution that is coming of the days before the flood of Noah, the days of Noah. And that's why that terminology is so important to people like us and Steve Quayle and Tom Horn and Ellie Marsuli and everybody else who's in the field researching this stuff, because we understand, we've had a glimpse of what the days of Noah looks like, and it ain't good. It isn't pretty. It's a darkness that we can't even comprehend yet. But it will be reinstituted. It will be resurrected before the end, before this whole thing comes to a conclusion. But we can have comfort in the knowledge of how this thing ends, which is what I referenced in the beginning. Jesus wins, period. That's the end of the story. So we're not trying to get people to be afraid. There's a difference between being afraid of something and being aware of something, because whether you like it or not, it's happening. I mean, whether you like it or not, you're drinking fluoride. Whether you like it or not, you're being affected by what they're pouring into the atmosphere through chemtrailing. Whether you believe it or not, doesn't make a difference. Whether you like it or not, cancer's up thousands of percentages from 20 years ago. Whether you like it or not, it makes no difference. It makes no difference whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not. There is a Luciferian priesthood on this planet bent on your destruction, especially if you're a Christian, whether you like it or not. And people say, well, but we don't have to worry about that unless you live in Iraq, I guess, right? Unless you live in Syria, right?
Right.
That's kind of a game changer, isn't it? Let me ask you a question, Josh. And I'm not asking you because you happen to believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. But if you or I are a Christian living in Syria, you with your children, me with my children, do you think that the time frame of the rapture would be that important to you?
No.
Or would you be more concerned about getting the hell out of there?
Yeah, no kidding. And that's something that, like, every time, like on my show or in my daily videos or whatever, anytime that the topic of the rapture or all these silly things that we want to argue about and everything comes up, I try to make that a similar point. Think about what's going on in the Middle East right now to Christians. I mean, they're being slaughtered and raped and families broken apart and I just all this horrific, tragic stuff. Where's their rapture? Do you think they're really thinking about that? And yet we're promised that it's going to get even worse than that, because we I think, like, the American Christian view is that we're safe and secure and it can't happen here. It's going to happen, and there's no guarantee, even with the pre-trib rapture view, there's no guarantee that the rapture is going to come before that, because it certainly hasn't come yet for them in the Middle East, and they that's their daily lives. That's what they have to deal with. So yeah, like I make it a point to always say that, like, a pre-tribulation rapture belief, which I do have, is no excuse to not be prepared. We still have to be prepared for what's ahead. We have to study things out and research things, and that's why it's so important to look at different angles, because any one of them might be right. If it's based on scripture and it's not some, like, heretical blasphemous thing, if it's actually based in scripture, there's a lot that can be taken from that. There are different interpretations, any one of which could be right on any given topic, like the rapture or anything prophetic. So it's important to be open enough to at least consider some of those possibilities. But yeah, like I said before, it's no excuse to not be prepared. It's far better to be prepared and not need it than to not be prepared and actually need it. And I do believe that we're absolutely headed towards a time where we are going to need it. We're going to need to know what happened before the flood, because those days are coming back. We're going to need to know, because even with a pre-trib rapture view, the Bible's just not specific enough on when that's going to happen. This stuff can start before that. So I wholeheartedly agree, and that's what's good about a lot of the research. Well, all the research that you're doing is it points back to that time that we can have as an example for what's ahead. And actually, in the first episode of your show, True Legends, it's entitled "Technology of the Fallen," that we've been kind of talking about throughout this episode. In trying to discover more things about the pre-flood world, he actually traveled to and explored Peru and Bolivia, and it's really interesting. What was it about those specific locations that you wanted to research and look into?
Well, I lived in Peru, so when we were thinking about where do we want to go first for our first expedition, Peru was the natural choice because it was the quickest, it was the easiest for me to put together. I have a lot of context there. I know what I'm looking for. And so that was just on a very basic level why we chose to go to Peru first. But then also it turned out to be a very wise choice, because as it happens, Peru and Bolivia are very they're linked in a very interesting way, specifically Peru and Bolivia, to a lot of other places on Earth, and in ways that I wasn't even aware of before. So it turns out that it's a good foundation. It's a good place to start if you wanna really get a good glimpse, an introductory glimpse of what David Flynn refers to as Cyclopean technology, and not just David Flynn. That's actually a common term that's used for the kind of megalithic stonework that fits these stones together without mortar. These very large stones. Peru is a great place, and Bolivia, to get a hands-on experience of what it actually looks like up close, because a lot of places you can only see things from a distance. A lot of places on Earth are closed. You don't want to go anywhere in the Middle East to see this kind of stuff right now. So Peru is still a very tourist-friendly place. Bolivia, not so much, but definitely Peru. And so all the logistics worked out. I speak Spanish, so everything just kind of worked out, and we went there and for our first expedition. But what I wasn't anticipating was to discover along the way all of the historic documents that prove the existence of giants, and not just the existence of giants that are that are 9 to 12 feet tall, but the existence of giants that are 15 to 30 feet tall, that were 15 to 30 feet tall. Very precise historic records concerning giants, histories concerning giants, both from the Inca and from the conquistadors and the historians, the chroniclers that came after them. So it really, I think a lot of people were probably bored out of their minds in parts of our documentary film, because I lay out so much. I had to decide what of this content do I want to include in the film, this historical content. And I just said, you know what, I'm just going to put it all in there. I mean, it may make your eyes bleed, for about 5 minutes or so, or 10 minutes or so during the documentary, to just absorb that much textual information. But it really lays the foundation for everything else that we're doing, because I think we've established that giants did in fact exist, and not just 9 foot tall guys, but 15 to 30 foot tall entities that they're absolutely incorporated into almost every major system of legends and myth from the primary civilizations on Earth, including the ones from South America, including the Maya, the Aztec, and especially the Inca. So we laid the groundwork, we laid the foundation that the megaliths were not built, historically speaking, in the opinion of the natives, and in the opinion of the conquistadors and of the chroniclers. The megaliths were not built by the natives. The megaliths in Peru and Bolivia were not built by even some extraterrestrial entities. They were very convinced. In fact, the Inca matter-of-factly believed that the megaliths were built by the gods before the world was destroyed in the flood. That the megaliths were built by the gods and their giant offspring. That's what they believe. We're not superimposing our belief onto what they believe. We're showing you what they believed. As a matter of fact, what they believed. Again, the Inca, the conquistadors, and the chroniclers believed that the megaliths, specifically in Peru and Bolivia, because those are the ones they're referencing, were built by the civilizations that existed before the flood of Noah. Civilizations, many of which happened to be giants. And I say many of which because there was so much going on in the pre-flood world. Oh my God! I mean, it was just an absolute. The complexity of what was happening before the flood of Noah. Look at what's happening now in our technological age. There's so much going on that it's hard to keep up with it. But I'm telling you, it was even more complex before the flood. Different kind of technology, but even more complex. There were so many creatures roaming this earth, so many entities, sentient entities, conscious beings that were not human and that were never supposed to exist, roaming this earth before it was destroyed in the flood of Noah. Many of
Wow.
which were giants.
Absolutely. And it blows my mind to actually consider how different life would have been back in that time, but also that we're headed towards something like that again. I mean, we're gonna have to deal with that. It's insane to think about. Some of the places that the sites and stuff that you've explored. The popular show Ancient Aliens, have covered those, and obviously, in my opinion, not as well as what you have. But I think just about any Christian or logical person would believe the same. But how do your findings compare and contrast with those of the popular television series Ancient Aliens?
Well, Ancient Aliens does not take into account. Let's be specific to Peru and Bolivia, because they went to Sacsayhuaman, they went to Pumapunku, Tiwanaku in Peru and Bolivia, to the Lake Titicaca area. They did not take into account, when they were at those locations, what the Inca actually believed or what the chroniclers actually believed. They just completely bypassed that as if it's not worth anything. It doesn't make a difference. They were stupid. They were stupid, ignorant, Neanderthalic-brained people. It doesn't matter what they thought. We're technologically advanced now. We have the internet. We have smartphones. We have the correct understanding to put this stuff together. They did not. So there's a blatant disregard for what the ancients thought about the megaliths that they ended up building on top of and occupying. So what they do, rather than reaching into the past to draw out the knowledge of what these peoples thought, instead they just completely speculate, 100% speculation, about an extraterrestrial influence. Now, much of what they present, I believe, is true. And I don't really care that they say extraterrestrial, blah, blah, blah. Fine. But they really make a point to sidestep the Bible and to sidestep the flood of Noah and the antediluvian world. And so they want to put all these pieces together, but they don't want to talk about the universal flood. They don't want to talk about the giants, the fallen angels. They don't want to talk about the watchers. They don't want to talk about the Genesis 6 narrative. They want to extrapolate from some of the circumstances and the issues and the evidences that come from the pre-flood world. They want to borrow those and carry them over to the ancient astronaut theory and incorporate them into their theory without giving credit to the rest of the story. That's where they make their fundamental error. I respect David Hatcher Childress. I like him a lot. I don't know him personally. I respect him because he's kind of an intrepid guy, an adventurous guy, going all over the earth and kind of playing the Indiana Jones role. I respect Brian Forster, the primary researcher dealing with the elongated skulls, especially in Paracas, and he's out of Cusco. I respect him a lot. I've had a limited correspondence with him. But these guys, fundamentally, if you really talk to them, listen to them, they despise the gospel. They can't give it any credit. They don't want to consider the possibility that the Bible is just true, that it is giving a true account, that the book of Enoch is giving a true and honest account of what happened. They don't want to accept that. It's not even within the realm of possibility for them. So they go over to the aliens. And I would say that they've got maybe 50% of the picture correct in postulating that there's no way that human beings mere human beings could have done this or that or the other, or that this had to be high technology and blah, blah, blah. Sure, we agree. But I think that it's way easier to prove, way more rational, that the narrative of the Bible is actually true. You can't sidestep the flood of Noah.
Yeah.
You sidestep the flood of Noah, you're getting into the realm of ridiculous. You really are. Because everybody believed in the flood of Noah. I don't care if Richard Dawkins doesn't believe it happened. What does that matter to me? Everybody before him did. Everybody that mattered in the ancient world believed in a universal flood. Or at least a localized flood that they could only extrapolate that it happened on a universal level because they only have proof that it happened in a localized area, the area that concerns them. But even the Inca knew that there was a flood that covered the whole earth. Even the Inca knew that. And so pushing that away, making that not part of the issue is very unscientific. It's not good research.
Yeah, absolutely, and I wholeheartedly agree. And Ancient Alien's one of those shows that I like to keep my eye on. I think I haven't seen the more recent ones like this past season, but before that I've seen every episode. And it's not for entertainment value or anything. I want to know what the world thinks about these things. I want to know what evidences are out there. So, but yeah, I agree that it's like they have a piece and they have a piece of the truth, but they don't want to go all the way with it. And so, like you said, they got to go to the alien stuff. So you're obviously a really active researcher, and you're continually and consistently putting out top quality content. And I wanted to ask, I'm curious, as of this recording, what is your most recent research about, and what are you finding out? Like the most recent things that you're looking into right now.
Well, the most recent thing that I've been involved in is the expedition that's being put together right now, and the details involved in what we're looking for. And Steve Quayle and I have been putting this thing together for a while, and we're chasing down not only evidence of everything that we've been talking about, the pre-flood world, and the giants, obviously, and all of this kind of stuff. But Steve believes, and I agree with him, that there's evidence to be found of living giants, and that there's reason to believe that there's things happening still under the ground, and that the cover-up is a lot deeper and a lot more complex than most people can even that are even willing to accept or consider. So, and I know that's being very vague because there's certain details I don't want to give away yet, but we are very much involved in planning the logistics right now, and we've got some production. We've got some production eye candy, I guess you could describe it as, CGI type stuff that's in the works. That's going to be coming out in our next episode. We've got a lot of research going on that we're conducting relating to our next episode. So that's what we've been involved in. Also, Steve's is almost ready to publish a new book, which I won't reveal what that is. I'll let him do that, but very exciting stuff. I think he's going to be announcing it in January. So that's a little teaser for people. Steve's got a new book coming out. Won't say what it is or even what it's about, but it's one of my favorite topics. And I'm willing to bet it's one of your favorite topics too, Josh. So, and he's got some pretty amazing information coming out in his new book. So he's involved in that. And I have to be sort of ambiguous about everything, because we don't like to give too many details away before we actually go and do the on location research and talk to our contacts and actually film stuff, because I don't want to tell people we're doing this, that, and the other, and then for some reason it falls through and we don't end up doing those things. So that was very vague and probably very unhelpful.
Oh no, that's totally fine
question.
and completely it's completely understandable, and it gives people something to look forward to, that there are big things ahead, and that's something I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on too, because that sounds really interesting. It is time for viewer questions for the audience. If you want the chance to be able to send in questions to future guests, you can do so at the Sharpening Report Facebook group. Just go to Facebook, look up the Sharpening Report, send a request to be a member of the group, and I'll be happy to approve you, as long as your Facebook page isn't spammy or trying to sell people jerseys or sunglasses or something like that. If you join the group every time there's a new guest, as far in advance as I can, I'll pin a post in the top of the news feed in the group. I'll tell you who the guest is, what the topic of the show is going to be, and then give you the opportunity to send in questions. So, and it's also just a great discussion group if you like talking about these sorts of things. And so again, it's the Sharpening Report Facebook group. Go ahead and join, and you'll be able to send in questions. And I only use first names here because I don't want to embarrass anybody. So there are actually quite a few of these, and which is, this was an excellent turnout. So it's really good to see that type of participation from the audience. First up, we have Brenda. She has two questions. The first one, she writes in, on the subject of the Antichrist, does he think it will be someone new, a human that either becomes possessed by Satan or carries the satanic bloodline, or that it might be either a clone or reanimated version of somebody we are familiar with already, i.e. Nimrod, Hitler, Osiris, etc.? Tim, your thoughts?
Let me say this about the Antichrist. First and foremost, I do believe that there will be a final Antichrist that will be a person who comes as a Messiah. I believe he will be received by the Jews as their prophesied Messiah. I believe he will be received by the Muslims as their Mahdi. I believe he will be received by the Hindus as whoever their prophesied figurehead is that is supposed to return, because almost every major religion has a prophesied figure that will or can return. I think he's going to fulfill that position for many of the religions out there, for many of the religious people out there, and consolidate all of those religions together, including Christianity. Now, it is important to understand that throughout history, historically, the popes of Rome have been considered to be the primary figureheads for Antichrist. Every pope of Rome has been viewed as an Antichrist, and so I believe that as long as there's a pope in Rome, we already have an Antichrist, because Antichrist means in place of, and the vicar of Christ literally means in place of Christ. So we have had an Antichrist present and an Antichrist system present since the conception of Roman Catholicism under Constantine. So it's important for people to understand that. I believe there will be a final Antichrist, and this individual is going to be unique. And he's going to be unique because of the authority that he will have. That's one of the reasons why he's going to be unique. The Antichrist is described in the book of Revelations of having the all-human authority, because the 10 kings give him their authority, which is interesting because it's God who entices them to do that. But then also the dragon, Satan, gives him his authority. So here we're going to have a person in whom all of man's authority and the devil's authority is going to be consolidated. That is a phenomenon that I think has not yet happened and is going to happen and will be unique to this individual. Now, I reject the idea that the Antichrist is going to be a mere political figure, such as the Left Behind series portrays him, and the other Christian movies that have portrayed the end times. The Antichrist is just some demonically infused figurehead. I don't believe he's just going to be a man possessed by the devil. I don't believe he will be fully human. I believe that the best way to understand the Antichrist is to take the person of Jesus Christ and flip it upside down, especially as it pertains to the prophecies of his coming. I believe that the Antichrist is coming on the clouds, and every eye will see him. I believe that every knee will be forced to bow to him, except for those of us who would rather die. But those who choose not to die will be forced to bow. Every tongue will be forced to confess. The Antichrist is the man. I believe he's only going to be part human. He has to be part human for a number of reasons. Is the man that the Luciferian priesthood is going to attempt to enthrone on that seat which belongs to the Son of Man. And that it has to be that way. And this, I won't go deep down this rabbit hole, but I believe that the human component is essential in all of this, because Jesus became one of us. He knew our every weakness. He never sinned, but he wore our flesh. He knew our every trial, and he did that for a number of reasons. Obviously, the most obvious is to redeem us. But the Antichrist has to be human enough to possess human authority. I won't go into human authority right now and why it's so crucial to understanding everything, but the Antichrist has to be human enough to possess human authority, to occupy that throne. However, he won't be fully human, in my opinion. Will he be the seed of Satan himself? I don't know. It's a possibility. I do know that he will have the devil's authority. He will have Satan's authority. That's clear in Scripture. And he will have the authority, the consolidated human authority on earth. So outside of those things, I don't know much else about this figure that is coming, except for that he's not going to like Christians very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And on the non-human aspect, but or part human, I agree with that as well. Brenda also asks, where, in his opinion, do the Nephilim, fallen angels, demons, etc., actually reside? Do they dwell in the hollow earth, on other planets, or both? Or are they strictly interdimensional beings that can appear in this reality under specific conditions?
All of the above. It's important to understand that the giants that were produced from the sexual union of the Watchers and women in Genesis 6 and in the book of Enoch and the book of Giants, those entities were judged before the flood. That after they perished in the flood, I do believe some of them escaped. So did David Flynn, by the way.
Yep.
But the grand majority, the vast majority, perished in the flood. And after they perished in the flood, not just the giants, but also all of the host of other sentient entities that came as a result of the fallen angels having intercourse with animals, that their spirits, but specifically the giants, I don't know actually about the other entities, but specifically the spirits of those giants that were a result of fallen angel with human woman, with angels with women, that those spirits were judged in the book of Enoch that they would have to wander the earth bodiless, and that they would be called unclean spirits. They would be called evil spirits, evil or / unclean spirits on the earth. and that they would hate humanity, especially the women from whom they proceeded. By the way, the women were turned into sirens, according to the book of Enoch. And there's a whole deal with that. But these entities, the spirits of these giants would wander the earth bodiless, that they would basically, in a paraphrasing what it says there, they will be hungry, thirsty, have sexual desires, but they won't have bodies to fulfill those things. So they'll be bereft of their bodies, but they'll have all the desires. Imagine being hungry, but not having a body to fulfill your hunger. Or being sexually charged, but not having any way to fulfill your sexual desires. Or being thirsty and not having any way to fulfill your thirst. That's what these entities, these spirits were sentenced to, that kind of a reality. Those became the possessing spirits. Those were the same unclean spirits that Jesus would cast out of people. And they knew that the Son of God was coming to judge them at some point in time. That's when when Jesus appeared on the earth, they came running to him, and they declared in more than one occasion, "We know who you are. Why have you come to judge us before the appointed time?" And Jesus told them to shut up. Mm-hmm. And so those are clearly the spirits of the giants, clearly from the book of Enoch. So that tells us what those unclean spirits are and why, which was always a mystery to me before I came upon the works of Steve Quayle in the book of Enoch, was a mystery to me why unclean spirits with whom I had to deal with, not personally, but in other people, wanted to inhabit the bodies of human beings to begin with. Never understood that. Why do you want to be in there in the first place? Why do these entities come in mass, not just one or two, but sometimes hosts of them will inhabit one human body? Why? What is the appeal there? It made no sense until you realize that they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're sexually charged, they're bereft of bodies. So what do they want? Bodies to fulfill the lusts of their flesh, to have flesh, to fulfill the lust of flesh. That's why when they inhabit people, if you've ever encountered a really demonically possessed person, you will find that there's always both the entities inside of them are both using the body as a source of pleasure, but are also utilizing that body, are tormenting that body, presumably because of jealousy or wrath against that body, because they don't have one. So that's the very important component when understanding what demon possession is. Those are unclean spirits, the very same that were the spirits of the giants before they perished.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, the Book of Enoch has so much interesting information on that. And, I was raised to believe that fallen angels and demons are the same thing. And that is complete. Yeah, and it's completely wrong. I mean, they're two totally different. I've had demonic manifestations that I've had to deal with, personally, in my family too. As far as I know, I've never come across the fallen angel, and I wouldn't want to. I mean, not like I would want to come across a demon either, but when we kind of compare the two, it's like there's just demons kind of like the mosquito with the whole thing. It's not.
And I would even go further and say that there's a confusion. I see the term angel, the term demon. Those are very general terms. Angel's a messenger. Angel encompasses a whole thing, a whole buffet of things, of creatures. Well, I think the term demon also incorporates a whole buffet of creatures. Specifically, though, unclean spirits are directly linked to the spirits of the giants, and possibly to the spirits of the other creatures that were came through the sexual union of the fallen angels with other creatures. So, demon, in at least in my opinion, represents a whole lot of things, not just one specific thing, but a whole lot of things. Whereas unclean spirit is directly referencing something very specific.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. Our culture has really butchered a lot of these terms. I wrote a book, Cherubim Chariots, that kind of went into the whole angel demon thing, and just how skewed our culture's perception actually is, of those things. Because yeah, a lot of times we'll be talking about something and then use the word angel, but that biblically isn't the appropriate title to give, that thing that we're talking about. That comes up quite a bit. So yeah, our culture has really done us no favors when it
Well,
comes
it's
to that.
Sunday school. It's Sunday school.
Yeah.
A lot of Christians have a Sunday school indoctrination that oversimplifies everything
Yep.
when it comes to the Bible, and that's one of the mental strongholds that Christians have to get over, is this Sunday school indoctrination, which most of us have grown up, if we've grown up in church, have been in Sunday school, coloring the happy face, sandal clad character of Noah, or somebody from before the flood. And so when we grow up, we naturally progress through life with this idea that the people who lived before the flood were just sort of primitive guys walking around in robes and sandals, and that's all there was to it, right? Because that's what we were taught in Sunday school, and it's never redressed, is it? It's never really redressed as you progress through. You graduate, I guess, from Sunday school to normal church life. Those things that are seated in you in a very supercilious and puerile fashion, in other words, infantile fashion, are never redressed when you start dealing with the real deep, weighty things of Scripture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what a lot of people are becoming disenchanted with the church, because, and a lot of times people, they equate church life with Christianity. So if they don't want to go to church, they think that they can't be a Christian anymore or something. And I mean, that nothing could be further from the truth. I actually like the idea of having like at-home meetings and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure,
Sure.
I'm sure, I'm sure there's plenty of good churches out there. I really haven't in the past decade or two. I haven't really come across any church that my family and I could stay in for too long, where I felt like we were really being spiritually fed, because with pretty much everyone that we go to, it's just after a while, like maybe after a year or so, it's like, okay, I get it. Like, we get it. And there's just nothing new. It's just the same, repeated stuff. So I like the idea of at-home meetings, because then everybody gets a turn to talk. We get to reason together. I mean, even doing the show, I prefer that model over just the same rehashing of the same, Sunday school stuff over and over again. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. Let's see, where are we at? Diana writes in, Timothy Alberino has some really great information on YouTube. I was thinking the devil needs technology to have a worldly end-time throne. Is my thinking off? When individuals talk about a solar flare wiping out electricity and sending us back into the dark ages, if we are in end times, that wouldn't happen until the time of tribulation. Wonder what Timothy thinks about what I'm pondering.
Well, let's say a solar flare or an EMP taking out the electrical grid of the United States would affect the United States. It wouldn't affect the elite in their underground bunkers. They've
Right.
got technology. They've got technology under the ground, which can withstand a nuclear attack, can withstand almost anything except for what's described as the bowls of wrath are being poured out in the book of Revelation. So they're pretty much, they're shored up against every contingency, and you can be assured that the power structure, that the prison planet will continue, whether you have electricity or not, whether your lights are on or not, their lights are on, and they'll be rolling into your town with their equipment that isn't going to be out of commission because your refrigerator doesn't work. So you need to be aware of the fact that it's very possible there could be an EMP or a solar. I doubt a solar flare, but there certainly could be an EMP. And the New World Order, the Illuminati, whatever you want to describe them as, will not be hurt at all. Their activities will, in fact, they'll use that kind of a situation to exert even more control. So, as it relates to the devil and technology, isn't it interesting? It is interesting. There's a divide. There was for me for a long time between spiritual things and physical things, between angels and then the physical realm and technology. But the closer you get to the truth, the more those ideas begin to merge, and you begin to realize, especially when you deal like with quantum physics and particle physics, that the metaphysical and the physical are very, very tightly woven together. So I just wanted to insert that there.
Yeah, absolutely. Things that came from that is that, we kind of have this outlook on the spiritual world, our culture and a lot of the church, that spiritual existence is kind of wispy or ethereal. It's like not as real as real life, and actually it's the complete opposite. We're the shadow, we're the wispy ones. When spiritual existence, and I in that book I talk about how the term extra dimensional and spiritual really can be synonymous. They're more solid and more real than we are. They just have access to what we would call the spiritual world, but really it's higher dimensions. It's the same thing that they can go in and out of. So to us it seems kind of wispy or ethereal, but really we're the ones that are like that. And so I thought that was interesting. Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really interesting thing. Tim writes in kind of a long paragraph, so I'm going to see if I can condense it. And he brings up a lot of interesting points and questions here. He says that he's having trouble wrapping his head around the Watcher UFO connection. He says he's heard you talk about UFO technology and its connection with the Watchers. And he writes, it's been a few thousand years since the Watchers first came down to Earth on Mount Hermon, began mating with humans to create Nephilim. We tend to think of them as giants, but are there different types or species of Nephilim that exist today? And then there are some other questions, but it seems like they base all around that main one. Are there different species? Are there spiritual and physical, or one or the other, or both?
Yes.
And do any of these groups inhabit other planets, or are they fixated on Earth?
Yes, generally, to answer that question, but again, it's very complex. It's a very complex situation because there's all kinds of creatures that were generated in the pre-flood world because of the promiscuous activity of fallen angels, the Watchers. By the way, the Watchers specifically refers to a very unique kind of class of angel. And even the good angels are called Watchers at one point. These just happen to be fallen Watchers. So this group 200 beings from a class of angels designated as Watchers, not just in the pseudepigraphical or the apocryphal works, but also in the book of Daniel. And these guys, 200 of them, specifically came down in the days of Jared and began to screw around with the genetics of life on Earth. I believe on one hand they were just having a how can I say this without it being too debauched? they were having a good time with a lot of things other than human women,
right,
as evidenced in the Book of Giants. But at the same time, outside of a physical pleasure kind of a realm, because they did want that. If you read the Book of Enoch carefully, you will see that it was a carnal desire. By the way, Paul says that women should cover their hair when they pray for the sake of the angels. Now, I'm not making a case here that women need to cover their heads when they pray, but what is it about when women pray that's interesting because that seems to indicate little rabbit trail here, that it seems to indicate that when we pray, we become visible to angels. Isn't that interesting? But then also that angels can be are for some reason, I don't know why, but for some reason can be attracted to females. Doesn't say nothing about males, by the way, females, and specifically their hair. They find their hair very attractive. That's what it says. Deal with it. But anyways, so there's a lustful component there to these watchers. They had sexual relations with a lot of things outside of human beings. It created a whole mess of sentient, prohibited, unsanctioned creatures on the earth that were never supposed to exist. God didn't create them, didn't plan for them to exist. They didn't come from his design. They came from this act of insubordination and rebellion. So you have all these creatures, many of which I think are many times smarter, more intelligent than humans, because they had their origins, they had components of angelic genes. That whole mess that happened in the pre-flood world, excluding the possibility of stuff happening in the pre-Adamic world, okay? And excluding the possibility of something strange genetically going on with Cain. Put those two things aside. Just deal with these fallen angels and what they did. That whole mess is, I believe, the prime origin for a lot of the little things flying around in saucers and in other craft. It's not exclusively the origin, but I think it's primarily the origin. I believe there is pre-Adamic stuff going on. I believe there was stuff going on with Cain. But you add all of that together, and you've got such a complex, compartmentalized mess to deal with, that it explains on one hand, but then it just creates a whole host of new questions on the other hand. And that's, I don't claim to have the answers for that stuff. I've got way more questions than I do answers concerning, for example, what about this species that seems to be living under the ground? You mentioned Hollow Earth. Okay, so there definitely seems to be a group of creatures, sentient. When I say sentient, I mean they're self-aware. They're like us. They can think, they can reason, living under the earth. And of course, the obvious question becomes, well, if all these things are smarter and stronger than us, then why don't they just take over? The short answer is because God doesn't allow them to. And that is also evident in the Bible and in the book of Enoch. And it has to do with human authority that was given to us over the face of the earth, over every beast of the field and bird and so forth, to take dominion. We have the keys. So there's a lot of creatures under the earth, on the surface of the earth, up in the atmosphere, possibly on other planets. I know a lot of people are starting to subscribe to Flat Earth. I don't chide them for that, but I personally do not. I do believe in a secret space program. I do believe Mars is absolutely essential to understanding a lot of this. And again, I don't get down on people if they believe in flat Earth. I personally do not, for a handful of reasons. So add all that together, and you've got a lot more questions than answers. And I'm right with everybody asking those questions.
Yep, absolutely, and that's something that I can relate to as well. It's one of the it's one of the most frustrating yet most exciting things about being a researcher and author is when you think you find an answer, you get a bunch more, a lot more questions. And I'm quick side note about the flat Earth thing. I totally agree with you there. I'm totally a round Earth guy, but I don't think people that believe in flat Earth are stupid. I don't hate them. I'm not angry with them. The whole vitriol between the two camps, in my opinion, is ridiculous. That's more ridiculous than I've ever thought the belief in flat Earth is. I don't really. Yeah, that's good. I'm actually glad that got brought up because that's something that it's something that I deal with continually because I get, for the most part, people who talk, because I think my audience knows me, so the people that ask me questions, they're not filled with rage or anything, because I just won't answer. But I've gotten messages about it, and sometimes it's like the way that questions are phrased, it's just like it's insulting to the other people that
It is.
believe in that. And it's like, where is that emotional response coming from? Like, why does that bother you so much if they want to believe the earth is a different shape? Like, who cares? Let them. They're not hurting anyone.
Right. And I always say this: I've never seen the earth from space.
Yeah.
So I can never say anything definitively. I couldn't. I'd never seen it, and I certainly don't believe NASA. However,
Yeah.
if you subscribe to flat Earth and you believe that all of the bodies, heavenly bodies, are within the dome, people who don't understand the flat Earth stuff won't have any idea what I'm talking about. But then you've got to trash the work of David Flynn, for example. It doesn't mean anything. It's not worth a dime, because and not only David Flynn, I'm just using him as an example. So many good researchers who have discovered so many things concerning the secret space program, concerning the moon, concerning Mars, and there is a host of stuff concerning Mars. And isn't it interesting that all this information is coming out on Mars? I would warn people who, if you're interested in flat Earth, researching it, fine. I think it's legitimate. I think it's compelling. I've researched it myself. I don't get mad at people. I don't put them down if they believe in flat Earth. But I would say this, a word of warning: be careful, because it might be a psyop in anticipation of something that's coming concerning Mars, specifically Mars. So I would just warn people to be careful. I'm not saying it is, I'm saying it could be. And that's what concerns me about flat Earth. So I just want to put that out for people. I have reason to believe there are indications that the flat Earth theory, maybe it wasn't started to be a psyop, but I believe at this point it is definitely being used as a psyop, even if it's true. And I know that sounds possibly contradictory, but even if it happens to be true, which again I don't believe it is, but even if it happened to be true, it's being used to create chaos and division in the ranks of people who know things that are true for sure concerning the superficial fake space program that we've been witnessing for the last however many years it's been with NASA, and a host of other things. So just a word of warning.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of people actually getting divorced over the flat Earth issue. It blows my mind. I mean, just the fruit of it, and not that, one theory, it's not that researching it is like a bad, well, like you said, we can research it, and I've looked into it myself. We've even done shows about it, on the Sharpening Report. And but yeah, I think that's good that you have a word of warning about it, because it can cause division if people allow it to. So I'm glad you brought that up. Levi writes in, he's got a couple of short questions here. He writes in, what is the story behind Lilith, the night hag? Could there be some connection between Lilith and a pre-Adamite or pre-Eve race of humans?
I don't know the story behind Lilith the night hag. I know that Steve does. It's in one of his books. I think it's in True Legends. I think he has a. I think he deals with it either in True Legends or in Little Creatures, his latest book. But I personally don't know much about Lilith, the night hag, except for that it was a bad idea to have intercourse with her. That's about all I know about that situation. But yeah, there's a host of creatures that are thought to have been myth, which there's very good reason to believe that they were not mythical creatures. They were very real creatures. And Lilith, the night hag, is probably among in that class.
Absolutely. Yeah. let's see. Okay, his second question. What do you know about the supposed technology of King Solomon? Ancient aliens sometimes mention Solomon's ring or his flying machine. So I was wondering what you know about such ancient technology, or are those stories even true?
There are ancient legends concerning Solomon and his flying ship. I don't know if it's ever been validated. I have no idea, but I do know that there is a legend concerning Solomon's ring, which he used to conjure demons, entities that he enslaved for the purpose of building the temple. That's a very famous legend. In fact, I believe that legend is central to Masonic rituals and Masonic tradition. Is it true? I don't know. I do know this. There does seem to be an indication to me that it might be true, because Solomon, often attributed as the wisest man in the world, or considered to be the wisest man who ever lived, was somehow beguiled by the women that he was engaged with, the many women that he was engaged with, and convinced to worship these other entities. So it is apparent that Solomon was dipping into what is referred to as the mystery schools. So it wouldn't surprise me that there is truth to Solomon's ring, and whether he had a flying craft or not. The only thing about him having a flying craft is it seems like a strange omission from Scripture. You would think that there would be some kind of a mention somewhere in the Bible, since we're told so much about Solomon, and even have writings from Solomon, that there would be some, even if only a vague reference to him having some kind of a flying craft. At least in my mind, that would seem, you would expect to find that. I'm not saying that means he didn't. I'm just saying that I have no indication outside of what others have dug up, such as David Hatcher Childress in his book Technology of the Gods. He breaks that down, and I think he makes some very valid points. But the ring, I do believe there is some truth to that. There is definitely reason to believe that Solomon did turn to what we call the mystery schools, to the forbidden knowledge and worship of these entities.
Yeah, I agree. It makes a lot of sense. Let's see. I'm going to try to condense this one down. Ashley and Aaron Mason write. Basically, they want to know what your opinion is about the skepticism of the Nephilim technology, and they make the point along the same line of questioning, I suppose. What does he think of the engineer in Flint, Michigan, that moved his garage and built the mini Stonehenge in his backyard without modern tools? Just curious. And then I'm not sure if this is Ashley or Aaron, because it says both names, but I guess they write, I love the Alberino analysis and all your books, Josh, at least what I've read so far. So I was just wondering about Timothy's opinion. So thank you, Ashley and Aaron Mason. So what are your thoughts about that, the other end of the Nephilim technology debate, or whatever you want to discussion, I guess?
Well, nobody knows how these individuals, I think there's two specifically, who were able to move around very large stones, apparently by themselves. I forget the guy's name, but the Coral Castle, I think it was in Florida, right? If I remember.
Oh,
right.
yeah, Ed Lee Gallon. Yep.
Yeah, that guy. And then I don't know who they're referencing. That I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, there was this guy. I've seen the video. He managed to use and it was like, it was authenticated. Like they did a news story on it. It's a real thing. He was able to basically use simple tools like ropes and just like handmade pulleys and just really simple tools to be able to cut out a big like a large chunk of rock. And he showed like these methods of being able to move it around, and he used those methods to actually move his entire garage, and it was just him doing it just by his own strength. And I think this guy was like in his 40s or something. So So he wasn't like some, big like bodybuilder or anything like that. He's just a normal looking guy. And it's an interesting video. Actually Mike Heiser just reminded me of it, and I forgot to get the link from him, but yeah, that's basically, so there's the idea that some people look at that and say, well, maybe ancient people wouldn't need advanced technology or help from giants to be able to do this. Maybe they could have used some of these. Yeah.
That's great, but problem is the giant bones, the historic accounts of giants. The problem is the where did the knowledge come from? And every indication is that it came from the Watchers. How they did it, to me, is quite irrelevant. The fact is that the technology came from somewhere, the knowledge came from somewhere, and also the evidence is actually overwhelming for giants and for other entities, and it may very well be that human populaces were able to do things that we can't figure out because they were using methods, maybe very simplistic methods that maybe are so simple that we can't figure them out. It really doesn't change anything for me. I don't think it changes anything in regards to the Genesis 6 narrative. It may be helpful in understanding some of the megalithic stuff, how maybe humans were able to build those things, but there's a lot more to these megalithic sites than just moving heavy stuff.
Right.
I'd like to see that guy incorporate the same technology, whatever he's using, to move the stone of the pregnant woman at Baalbek.
Yeah, exactly.
Or to shape the andesite blocks in Pumapunku. There's a lot more involved than just moving heavy stuff. We know for a fact that there are even current cultures in remote places that still move very large blocks to this day, and they do it with a lot of rope and a lot of manpower, and they erect megalithic stones. Well, so what? I mean, that's not that impressive. But when you take those megalithic stones, you shape them precisely, and you build these massive structures with them, that's a whole nother level of technology. It's not just about moving things. It's about the precision, and it's about the laser precision, truly laser precision of a lot of what's out there in terms of megaliths. So yeah, sure. I'm sure there's crossover technology that humans were using that was based on and adapted from technology that non-humans were using. I'm sure there's all kinds of crossover there.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes sense, and I would agree with that. Carol writes, let's see, there's a little intro here, but okay, I'm interested in the picture/drawing that I saw on one of his recent shows. I've seen him maybe Skywatch TV. It was a picture of a felled giant surrounded by Marines with weapons. Is that a drawing of a true life event? Are there giants of this size and nature still in the world today? And if so, where are they found? Is this one of the ways the elite are finding giant DNA to compare bloodlines?
That image was on the cover of Steve Quayle's book, Long Walkers, and is, in fact, a illustration of a true event. Steve was in contact with a gentleman who was flying an AC-130. I think he's still active duty, AC-130 pilot, who was called into Afghanistan to pick up some cargo. The cargo happened to be a dead giant. I think it was 12 to 15 feet, somewhere in there.
Oh, wow.
And the giant, red-haired giant, pretty sure it had 6 fingers, 6 toes, had killed and devoured a handful of Marines before they were able to kill it. So this giant was moved, flown out of Afghanistan to a base in Germany. That's what that picture depicts. By the way, that AC-130 pilot, we're going to have him at some point in one of our episodes, possibly the next one. We're going to have his live testimony on camera. So the guy does exist. The story is true. We probably will have to mask his identity, but he is active duty, or at least was last time I checked. Fascinating story. Steve's the one who tells that story the best. I don't know all the little details. He does. But it is a fascinating story. So I don't remember the rest of that question. Yes, giants still exist. There's stories of giants that appear all over the place, especially in remote areas. And even in the 80s, I always forget this guy's name. It's very difficult to find the information anymore. But there was a gentleman, I should have printed out the story. It was from National Geographic, I think. It was either National Geographic or Discovery. I think it was National Geographic. I can't remember his name. He was looking for a lost city in Peru, and they were hiking up a mountain. This was like from the 1982 or something, and he wrote this in the National Geographic in this article when he got back. And on their way up the mountain, they were stopped by a giant. He said he was the largest human being he had ever seen. It was a giant in every sense of the word. Stepped out onto the path, raised his hand, motioning them to stop right where they were. And I think he had a spear or something like that. So that was in National Geographic, or a adventurer, or an explorer who was associated with National Geographic. And so yes, giants still exist. In remote places.
Wow, that's definitely interesting. Well, we're people are gonna have to keep their eye out for that episode of True Legends. That sounds really interesting. There's one last question here. Brenda writes in, what is his opinion on the possibility that part of the reason the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003 and seized their historic and antiquated artifacts immediately upon arrival was because of the recent discovery of the tomb of Osiris? Could it be that they took possession of the DNA of a god king, which would be of satanic bloodline, so they could use it for creating cloned beings or Antichrist, or to use to infect mankind somehow through vaccines, etc.?
I had heard that they actually were that they had discovered the body of Gilgamesh, and that they were interested in extracting his body and his DNA. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know. I suspect it is. But I do know that Tom Horn tells a very interesting story concerning that whole episode that is, I think, evidence that there's truth to that. You'll have to go and find that. I've only heard Tom tell it one time. I don't even remember what program it was on. I'm pretty sure it was on Tom Horn and Steve Quayle were talking together on the Hagman and Hagman program, and Tom mentioned some inside information that he had concerning that whole situation, and he had actually viewed images of military personnel extracting some very interesting things out of the secret basement of a museum in Iraq. Pretty sure it was Iraq. So yes, I do believe there's truth to that. I'm probably not the best source. I know I'm not the best source for that. I would encourage people to go try and find Tom Horn's story concerning that. It's very convincing, very credible. And I think it will convince you that indeed they were looking for something more than just to depose Saddam Hussein, and even more than just to gain control over the oil fields.
Yeah, and I think you're right on what program it was, because I remember, I mean, it's been a few years, but I remember listening to that as well. I do remember for sure it was Tom Horn and Steve Quayle talking, and I believe it was on Hagman and Hagman. But I know that has been referenced a lot. And, other researchers have referenced that specific show, so it should be pretty easy to track down if people just.
It's a fascinating story, absolutely fascinating story.
Yeah, absolutely, and there is a lot of credibility to it, and But yeah, I think it's probably pretty easy for people to find if they just do a YouTube search or Google search for it or something. Well, that's it. That's the end of the viewer questions. Again, for the audience, if you want the chance to send in viewer questions to have to ask future guests of the Sharpening Report, you can do so on Facebook, the Sharpening Report Facebook group. So go ahead and join. We're happy to have you, and there's a lot of great conversation too. So we're just about wrapping this up. This has been an just awesome interview. If people want to know more about you or your work, where can they go?
Nowhere. Really. Well, there's the YouTube channel. There's the Gen 6 Productions YouTube channel. I also have my own, which is basically just all the same stuff that's on Gen 6 Productions. And the True Legends, the documentary series .com. I'm sorry, TrueLegendsTheSeries.com is the website of our documentary series. TrueLegendsTheSeries.com. That's where they can acquire our recently released documentary, our first episode of our documentary series entitled True Legends. They can get it there. You can rent it on Vimeo. You can get the link there on that website, or you can purchase the physical DVD. TrueLegendsTheSeries.com. If you send an email through through the email section on that website, through the contact section on that website, I will get it. So that's one way you can contact me. I don't have a Facebook page. It is kind of hard to get in contact with me. In fact, if people want to get in contact with me, I might as well just give them my email, timothyalberino@hotmail.com. And I might regret that later, but there it is. It's not a difficult one to figure out. So,
well, fantastic. I really appreciate you being open to people contacting you. That's awesome. And I'll put your links and stuff in the. So for the audience, the links will be in the show notes here. Definitely subscribe to his channel. Subscribe to mine if you haven't already. So if you had to wrap up this episode into one final thought, which I'm sure is going to be difficult because we talked about a lot of things, which is great. But what would you want the audience to take away from our discussion?
Colossians 1:15-17. He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things consist.
Amen. That's a great a great final note to end the interview with. Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show and for offering us so much of your time. I know you're incredibly busy, so it's very much appreciated. And this has just been an awesome discussion. We're definitely gonna have to have you back on sometime.
Well, I've enjoyed this very much, and appreciate you having me on. And I'm willing to come back whenever you want. I think we did. I think we did almost 4 hours.
Yeah, I think about 3 or 4 hours. That's good. It'll give there's a lot of content for the audience. But yeah, absolutely, we'll have you back on. And I know my audience pretty well. I'm sure that I'm going to get a lot of suggestions to bring you back on. So we'll definitely set that up.
Well, thank you, Josh, and I look forward to coming back on in the future. And certainly when we get back from this next expedition that we're about to go on, I'll have a lot more information that I will be at liberty to talk about that I think you guys would probably find very interesting.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to that. All right, hang on the line. Well, that again was Timothy Alberino, host of True Legends and the Alberino Analysis. I obviously highly recommend both. Make sure to subscribe to them on YouTube. Subscriptions are really important for those of us who have channels, and also it keeps you updated as well as grow the channels that you're watching. So and also check out True Legends. You can keep up to date at the links that Tim gave, and they'll be in the show notes. If you would like to find more episodes of The Sharpening Report, you can do so at ministudyministry.com and my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Josh Peck Disclosure. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you care to help support Mini Study Ministry, you can do so at ministudyministry.com. Your donations go to the everyday running of Mini Study Ministry and help us bring you more episodes of The Sharpening Report, as well as more books and materials and other things of that nature. And in fact, we have a deal right now for a donation of any amount. I don't care if it's $1, I don't care if it's a penny, any amount. I will send you 5 free PDFs of my books, my 5 books in PDF format. I'll email them to you personally. So check out the Mini Study Ministry donate page for more information on that. Also, if you make a purchase at Neshama Essentials, that's my wife's company, which has the most top quality yet absolutely affordable health and beauty products you'll ever find. It's the same deal. Any purchase at Neshama Essentials, which is just neshamaessentials.com, you can check for the link in the show notes below, and you will get 5 free PDFs of my books. Just make sure you include your email address with your donation and or purchase. And this will continue through October. So you got about 5 or 6 more days, depending when you're watching this. So act now. And as I say in every episode, I'm going to say, please only donate if you feel God leading you to do so. This is not an obligation. If you're not sure or if you don't feel led, you can always pray for us. We can always use more prayer. We're not 501c3, not that we're against it. We're just not. So your donations aren't going to be tax deductible. And I'm never going to be the kind of person that's going to promise you extra blessings from God or a miraculous 10-fold return on your money or anything like that. We're not in the business of making promises for God. But what I can promise is that your help, be it prayer or financial, it's greatly appreciated. It keeps us going, and it's the only reason that we're able to continue doing what we do. So all of that being said, we are all out of time, so I want to thank you so much for tuning in to The Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck, and as always, take care and God bless.